Hey guys. This is part 3 of What If Naruto knew he was a Jinchuuriki. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 8. Pacing near the wall beside the north gate leading out of Konoha, Ino kept glanced at her watch every 5 minutes and snorting. Leave it to Naruto to totally mess everything up, they should have left an hour ago. Grumbling, Ino glared at her sensei in utter annoyance, yet the chronically sick J-Unin seemed completely impervious to her glare. He was even content to remain crouching in the shade of the gates, listening to Shino talk with the bug crawling along his finger. The silence continued onward for another half hour before Ino's temper finally snapped, and she stomped her foot on the ground, her teeth grinding. That baka! If we have to wait one more minute! What were you thinking taking such an idiot on our team? At this Hate coughed, looking up at her curiously. When Ino cocked her hip and crossed her arms, an obvious sign of her dangerous displeasure, Hate started talking. Each team is designed to be balanced. We're balanced by having one of the biggest morons in Konoha on our team? Ino demanded curtly, eyes narrowing. Cha, I don't see it. Each team is designed so that there's one ninja for gathering information, one for creating a strategy using that information, and one that can create the tactics needed to make the strategy succeed. Ino, you're perfect for gathering information, while Shino is perfect for strategy and Naruto is perfect for tactics. So that is why the teams were designed like they were, Shino said after a moment before nodding. It makes sense. That design would allow each team to be given almost any type of mission and have an almost assured chance of completing it successfully. But still, why'd we have to get Naruto? Why couldn't you get Sasuke and let Sakura have Naruto? Ino grumbled, looking away. That would have messed up the teams. Sasuke's team has begun handling C-ranked missions. Messing with it would not be in anyone's best interest, Hate said, covering his mouth while coughing yet again. Well, of course they are. They have the number 1 genin. Ino protested darkly. We're like getting another idiot that'll probably get himself killed instead of just injuring himself. Actually, we're getting the number 1 genin, Hate said, and then seeing her dark look sighed. Uchiha Sasuke was the number 1 academy student, but Uzumaki Naruto is actually the number 1 genin. It's the teamwork that makes Team 7 the premier team. What are you talking about? Shino inquired curiously. Well, how can I explain? Hate said, rubbing at his nose. Sasuke-sen and Team 7 have just begun performing C-ranked missions, while Naruto has completed one B-ranked mission successfully and is about to perform another. So as it stands, Naruto is the top genin. Naruto, the top genin? As if. Ino said slowly, eyes wide. Well, another factor is skills. Both have been taught above genin level, but Sasuke-sen has been taught more conservative skills compared to Naruto. Sorry about being late, I was having some rain dash. Naruto shouted, interrupting the conversation as he jogged toward them, shoving items in his pockets. Skidding to a halt, he blinked, realizing that they were all staring at him. Do I have something on my face? We should get going, Hate said, standing up once more. Naruto, you take the lead. Right, Naruto said enthusiastically, facing toward the gates, finger raised. Let's go. Ino just barely repressed her groan of frustration. She didn't care what Hate said. There was no way she could believe that Naruto was better than Sasuke. The boy was a hyperactive monkey, his voice grating, and could he not grasp that orange was not a good color? Hell, she hadn't spent more than a few minutes with the blonde and Ino's eyes were already starting to burn from the color. Why did she have to have the moron on her team? Reaching up, Ino rubbed her temples, biting her tongue against the urge to shout at the boy as he led the way beyond the gates. About 20 minutes later, Naruto started singing a nursery rhyme in a grating voice, and Ino felt her eyes starting to twitch. Abiram Shino had not graduated as the best student, nor had he graduated with a clever nickname. Shino had, to the vast majority of the graduating class, been just another guy. This had been fine with Shino. He preferred the quiet. It was a preference that he had picked up from his exposure to both his father and his Kikeichu family. So needless to say, listening to Naruto sing put his hard-gained stoicism to the test. High up is the castle wall, that brightly showed up who drawed the classes try. The moon is prising high in the depths of night. To rise and fall is people's fate, the moon shines so bright. How I love the moon dash. Shino winced. Naruto sounded like a banshee or the screeching ghost of a torture victim. His voice even affected his Kakachu, who demanding the blonde's immediate death. Shino didn't even want to think of how this was affecting Ino. "Will you please shut up?" Ino shouted, shoving Shino aside as Naruto turned in surprise. Apparently Ino had been driven crazy. Which was understandable after listening to the same screeching words for the last 4 or 5 hours. "Oh, you have a problem with me singing? Duh! First, you can't sing, and second, those aren't even the right words." Ino snapped back. "Those are the words," Naruto shouted back. "Are not. Are so. Are not. They are the right words. If you think you can sing it better, then why don't you?" Naruto shouted, not backing down one iota from Ino. "Are you really going to dash?" Shino started to ask, already sensing that was the case. When Ino shot him a glare, he sighed, allowing the two to continue their tirade. Ino, apparently satisfied that Shino was silent, snapped her attention back to Naruto, hands on her hips. "Cherry blossoms gracefully bloom over the fields that lie. High up is the castle wall. Where have warriors gone? Where is the moonlight that brightly shone up high, shone upon the warriors who drained the glasses dry?" Naruto's mouth opened in surprise, which Shino felt like mirroring. Ino's voice had been soft and gently. It was almost like listening to a professional singer. Can we please continue with the mission now?" Hate said, coughing, startling all three. Naruto snapped his mouth shut and turned marching off ahead, but this time he was silent. Ino crossed her arms and allowed Shino to resume his spot directly behind the other boy. Once Shino had gotten over his surprise at Ino's voice, he considered the fact that Naruto and Ino seemed to argue and fight almost every time they turned around. Usually Naruto would provoke Ino, but he could count at least one instance where Naruto had been provoked. Shino felt uneasy about that. They were a team after all, and they had to work together. Those two would never be able to do that, which made one fact obvious. Unless Shino made the effort to bridge the gap between the two, they would never be a team. He just didn't have an idea of how to do just that. Ino had never been a fan of teamwork, but she had grudgingly worked with him. However, with Naruto in the formula now, that would never happen. They would probably go against anything he suggested if it was backed by the other. Still, Shino knew he had to do something, and that meant private team training. No hate, no friends. Total isolation so that they could learn to get along, or to at least set aside personality conflicts. The most likely to agree with the least amount of resistance would probably be Ino. That decision made, he checked in briefly with his Kakachu family that he had spread out around them. There was nothing out of the ordinary going on, a few wild animals but no people other than an old man gathering fruit. Turning his mind away from those, he checked on his teammates, finding things in proper order. "Ow!" Naruto suddenly shouted, slapping at his neck. Shino was jarred out of his thoughts, watching as the bug he had placed on Naruto darted off the blonde and back into the safety of Shino's body. Shino spent a few minutes watching Naruto grumble, then turned his attention back to the bug in question, Kumi-chan. Kumi-chan was apologetic, explaining that Naruto's chakra had goaded her into biting. Shino scowled, asking other members of his family to see how they would react to Naruto's chakra. As a handful left, he wondered what kind of chakra could be so powerful as to override his family's training. Shino had his question answered minutes later when Naruto started slapping at his neck while his family returned to him. He waited patiently for the few he had sent out to settle and then gently prodded the oldest involved, Mako-chan. Her answer, that part of Naruto's chakra urged us to gorge, only deepened Shino's confusion. Shifting his attention back to Naruto, Shino wondered at the impossibility of it. His family had been exposed to Hate and Sasuke. Both had large chakra capacities, and yet they had never had this problem. What made Naruto's chakra any different? Why did they want to gorge when they never had before? There was something odd about Naruto. Something strange. Shino suddenly felt very uneasy. Naruto was smiling, he was laughing, being a nuisance to his teammates, but he didn't care. Because he was on a mission, so he was pretending while hiding the tight, hard knot in his stomach. It wasn't fear, it was more like dread, but it was there in a knot. A dread that he would have to do it again, spend another night of uneasy sleep dreaming about another ninja's death. A death he would cause, that he would have to cause. Like Anko had taught him in Kusa better than him, he would hate it, but he would do it. It was hard to create the part of his mind that he would need to survive the splattering of blood, but Naruto thought he was halfway there. So he kept his game of pretend going, wondering if the others were able to take a life. Well, that and why the hell they had to do all this damn walking. Why couldn't they just be there already? He hated these long periods of nothing, it was so boring. Oh well, at least someone had bothered to acknowledge him as an experienced ninja. Soon he really would be Hokage and everybody would see his strength. The thought of him being Hokage was enough that he started chuckling to himself, imagining his future self kicking Sasuke's ass. Then Sakura would be fawning all over him, and then. He scowled, blinking as he realized he had never really thought of what would come after that long dreamed of day. Oh well, it didn't really matter, he'd figure that out when he got there. It was around this point that his thoughts were interrupted by his stomach growling in hunger. Putting a hand to it, Naruto grumbled slightly, glancing at the sky, startled that it was actually darkening. He hadn't realized just how long they had been walking. The upside would be that they would be stopping soon so they could eat. This was a good thing since he really didn't want to complain. Anko had done a lot to dissuade him of that. He felt a tremor run up his spine at the mere memory. I think it's time we stop for the night," Hate said, bringing the group to a halt. "Finally," Ino muttered, sitting down on an overturned log. Naruto rolled his eyes as he slung his pack off to collapse at the base of a nearby tree, hunting for a cup of his instant ramen. Finding it, he grinned happily and started noisily satisfying his stomach's grumbling. Was there anything better than ramen? Well, maybe a kiss from Sakura, not that he would really know. Debating the two options, Naruto realized that he was being watched and snapped his attention up to find Ino glaring at him. "What the hell?" Naruto glared back, unintimidated. Snorting, Ino looked away, watching Shino talk to his bugs and Hate start a fire. Naruto muttered something and then went back to his meal, ignoring the apparently obvious fact that Ino didn't like him. He didn't have a clue why, and he didn't care. She was another damn Sasuke fangirl and she was not Sakura, so she was beneath his contempt. Then his chopsticks of ramen paused halfway to his mouth, a sudden thought hitting him. What if he smelled really bad? Anko would have slapped him upside the head. If she didn't, then he usually didn't care what he smelled like. Still, he didn't want to be the smelly guy. Lifting his arm, Naruto sniffed his armpit only to frown. Obviously that wasn't it. That was when he felt her attention again, and looked up to catch her staring at him in confusion. "What the hell are you staring at?" Naruto snapped. "You!" Ino shot back. "Cam, you're disgusting. You're like a stupid monkey." "Hey, at least I'm not pining over some gay pretty boy." Naruto shot back, and then when she opened her mouth to say something, he cut her off. "Save it!" Ino's face reddened even more, then started to angrily pull things out of her pack, muttering. Naruto made it a point to eat as horribly as possible, ignoring her. Briefly, he wondered if Anko would help him hide Ino's body if he killed her, then decided that she might point out that he would have to kill Shino and Hate as well. Well, there went that idea. He would have just ignored that annoying girl. Well, that and piss her off, so as far as Naruto was concerned, anything that pissed her off was a good thing. Finishing his ramen, Naruto tossed it beside him and grabbed another cup, scowling in thought as he ate. What was Anko doing? She had seemed so upset? Yeah, upset. Anko had been upset last night about him and this team. Why couldn't he have just stayed with her? Sure, she was a psychotic bitch, trying to kill him every time he turned around, but she was alright. He paused, tilting his head in consideration. Yeah, Anko really wasn't that bad. She was fun and she enjoyed his pranks, approved of his brashness. He chose to ignore how she liked to try and gut him on a regular basis. Then he realized who he was thinking such things about and shivered in fear, his appetite almost ruined. Shaking it off, he focused on his meal and finished it quickly. Setting it aside, he settled back and made the quick decision that he was far too tired for much of anything else, and thus made advantage of one of Anko's many lessons. Instant sleep, even if it took an act of the kami to wake him back up again. This act of the kami came several hours later, in the form of his bladder. Naruto, of course, jerked awake, stumbling into the forest, sighing in relief while his eyes refused to focus. Finished and mumbling to himself, he returned to camp, scratching at his stomach as he blew past the fire and into a tent that he swore was his. Naruto quickly shed his orange jacket and shoes, then after a moment's consideration his shirt as well. Chuckling sleepily to himself, Naruto then proceeded to climb into his sleeping bag and curl up with the warm and soft pillow he found inside. After that, he was once more lost to the realm of sleep and dreaming very odd dreams. Very, very odd dreams. But that damn pillow sure was comfortable. Ino woke up slowly to the odd, yet pleasant, sensations of warm breath tickling the nape of her neck and something hard pressed tightly against her. It felt like a kunai, yet she had no question that the breath on her neck was nice. Which meant, in her sleep-clouded brain, it was Sasuke. That wasn't quite right, however, she realized a few seconds later through her sleep haze. The black-haired god was miles away, possibly still in Konoha, and whatever was pressing against her didn't quite feel like a kunai. Hesitating, she shifted in the sleeping bag before cautiously slipping a hand behind her. She then slid her hand away. She laid there, her mind working furiously. Sasuke wasn't around, and if he wasn't likely to turn up in her bed. Naruto, dumb as he was, would have more sense than to do something so perverted and stupid. So that left either Shino or hate, but the person behind her didn't feel like he was even as tall as her. Opening her blue eyes slowly, she stared at the side of her tent for a moment, wondering. The simple answer would be to just unzip the bag, climb out, and see who it was. Shifting slightly, which meant she had to press against the kunai even more, she tugged at the zipper and found it stuck. Frowning, she stopped. Then she felt the male behind her stirring. As he woke up, she heard a yawn followed by a moment of silence. Ino felt the way he quit breathing, though his kunai never seemed to change. Then she started seeing red when she heard a familiar male voice whispering a prayer. Ino narrowed her eyes, anger and embarrassment building inside her. Ino might have even let him escape unharmed to avoid the embarrassment, until the kunai pressed against her like she was a holster. "Uzumaki Naruto, you are a dead man!" That shouted. The sleeping bag was ripped asunder as Naruto promptly tried to escape, and Ino grabbed him around the neck to alternate strangling and beating him senseless. In Naruto's defense, his innocent act was flawless, but Ino didn't care. All that mattered was killing the blonde pervert. He tried to make another break for it during a moment, while Ino caught her breath. He was promptly rewarded with a swift blow to his crotch from behind. Whimpering in pain, he had no choice but to suffer the continued wrath of Ino, who, as was widely known, had no mercy when she was pissed. An hour later, finally finished beating the boy to within an inch of death, Ino dusted her hands off, turned, and marched out of her tent. Who did that bastard think he was? Did he just think she wouldn't beat him? Her anger was only compounded when she found Hate and Shino staring at her. "What the hell are you looking at?" Ino shouted at Shino, actually radiating enough killer intent to make him flinch before wisely turning back to his bugs. Ino huffed, trying to calm down. She tried to rationalize a reason why he would turn up like that in her tent. Sadly, it was impossible. Ino could see no damn reason why he would ever show up in her sleeping bag. Running her fingers through her hair, she huffed, noticing the slate-colored sky as she marched into the forest, looking for a stream. Maybe those guys could stand to go without a bath, but Ino demanded one, especially after having that Naruto pressed against her. 20 minutes later, she stopped and stomped her foot in frustration, glaring heavenward. "Why me? Huh? Why?" In answer, there was a clap of thunder, signaling the beginning of the early morning shower. Oh, that was just perfect. First she got a pervert as a teammate, and now she was going to get drenched. Was she such a bad person that she had to be punished like this? Grumbling, knowing defeat when faced with it, Ino sloshed her way through the rain, avoiding the mud as best she could. She could handle getting wet, she could handle Naruto, but if her clothes were ruined by mud, she would go ballistic. Hate normally liked going out on missions, even easy ones like this, because they always seemed to help him. He could breathe easier, felt more energy, and even with the humid air, it was no different. Save that he now had a throbbing headache, one that had nothing to do with being sickness. No, this headache had one source. A source dressed in bright orange, had the worst singing voice he had ever heard, and constantly pissed off Ino, a girl who had a way of screeching that made even Naruto's singing voice sound pleasant. Hate honestly could not see why Anko had not killed the blonde immediately. He knew Anko, they had worked together once. She was not a very tolerant person. As a matter of fact, the only person she had ever seemed to get along with like a normal person was Kakashi. So why she had not only allowed Naruto to live but trained him to the level he was at completely baffled Hate. Reaching up with his free hand, Hate rubbed at the bridge of his nose, wondering why he had ever let Yugao talk him into being a Jonin sensei. A wry smile found its way to his face as he remembered exactly how she had convinced him. Thinking about her, Hate felt a brief moment of interest in what exactly she was even thinking about their relationship. He shrugged it off, however, shifting back into serious ninja mode. Eyes darting around, Hate concentrated on finding the landmark that had been in the mission scroll. He had just started to think that they weren't close yet when he saw the ANBU marker hidden in the bark of a tree. Glancing at the sky, he nodded to himself before looking around. They had made good time, despite having to wait for the rain to end and for Naruto to recover. Hate considered the various factors and decided that they could probably make it a bit further after they met the contact, and then they would have to stop for the night. 3 days wasn't so bad, especially for a genin team. It would probably take a week to settle things and then another 3 days, so they'd be gone a total of 13 days. Maybe Yuga was right about this being a kind of vacation, 13 days in the field, on a C-rank mission that they would receive B-rank pay for. After a few more minutes of travel, Hate finally spotted their contact before anyone else. The man was short, balding and heavy-set. However, there was something about his bearing that told Hate there was more to his man than normal. Seconds later the others noticed him, and came to a stop, allowing Hate to move forward to meet the man. "You must be the ninja from Konoha," the balding man said anxiously, rubbing his hands together while eyeing Hate. "I'm the headman of Jinchuuriki, Yakanadama Joji." I'm Gecko Hate," the sick Jayunin said, covering his mouth as he coughed. "This is Yamanaka Ino, Abirame Shino and Uzumaki Naruto." "Ah. Good, I was beginning to worry," Joji said, smiling faintly, fishing out a colored silk handkerchief to dab at his forehead. "I'm so pleased that you arrived safely. Bandit raids are increasing lately." Hate nodded, filing that information away for future consideration. "Perhaps we should start for the village then." "Of course," Joji said, almost brightening. "Just follow me and don't worry. We should be there by the time the sun sets tomorrow." "The way you say that sounds like it's not soon enough," Ino suddenly interjected, causing the man to pause and glance at her with a reassuring smile. "I don't like being out of the village longer than I have to be." Ino didn't like the path the instant they started down it. First off, it was narrow, and she was forced to follow close behind Shino in single file. Second off, the trees, which could barely support a pair of blackened leaves, formed a sort of gloomy tunnel, and the path wound its way around the trunks. The air was so oppressive that after several minutes their feet thumped against the ground loudly. Even Naruto was subdued by the atmosphere. Ino felt her heart take an upswing every time she saw a slender beam of light that broke its way through the leaves far above and avoided being caught in the matted twigs and tangled limbs. All too soon, however, these shafts of light ceased, and Ino was forced to endure the gloom without solace, and at times forced to grab the back of Shino's jacket to keep from getting lost. It felt like they had been traveling for hours, and Ino was past the point of caring about much of anything. All she wanted was to reach the village so she could take a warm bath and relax. It seemed that a god heard Ino's silent wish, for soon enough they reached a much brighter stretch of forest, and Ino felt herself cheering up at this. Without the undergrowth, the shadow was nowhere near as deep, and while the light was greenish, it was at least light. Ino also took comfort in the fact that they now had a semi-fresh breeze. Thankfully, they passed through what remained of the forest in another hour, and she was once more bathed in the wonderful rays of the sun, even if it was starting to dip beyond the horizon. "I think we should stop for the night," Joji said, while wiping at the back of his neck with the handkerchief and glancing around at the field. "We should reach the village by noon tomorrow." "Or why can't we keep going?" Naruto asked. Joji nervously rubbed at his hands. "Well, we have to cross a deep ravine using a rope bridge." Ino froze, her pack half off her shoulder, staring at the man suspiciously. "Like, why do I get the feeling there's something about this bridge you're not telling us?" It's not exactly whole," Joji explained, laughing nervously. "I nearly fell 5 times getting to this side of the ravine." "Right," Naruto said, giving a thumbs up. "Well, then I guess it's a good idea to stop for the night." Ino rolled her eyes and turned back to unpacking her sleeping mat, not wanting a repeat of what had happened last night. Locating the flattest and driest surface that she could, she unrolled it, pleased that Hate was smart enough to set up the campfire nearby. Setting down on her mat, Ino lifted her pack and started shifting through it for the essentials: food, water, a mirror and brush. Cammy, she couldn't wait to get back indoors, then she could have a bath, wash her clothes and take proper care of her hair. Grumbling, she worked the ponytail loose and ran the brush through, wincing at every knot that she had to struggle with. "Cammy, I'm hungry," Naruto grumbled, flopping down near her with a splattering of mud, a cup of ramen in his hand. Ino froze as the mud hit the edge of her sleeping mat, then glared at him. "Ugh, don't you have anyone else to annoy?" Naruto paused, looking up, about to say something with a mouth full of ramen, causing Ino to grimace. "You are so disgusting. Cammy, don't you ever eat anything else?" Narrowing his eyes, Naruto gulped his food down without chewing. "Oi, like you're any better." Besides, don't you know that ramen is the perfect meal? A gift from the gods. Ino rolled her eyes, turning back to her mirror. There was no point in trying to argue with that moron. Wincing at a particularly cruel knot, she wondered why she had to be punished like this. Finishing up, she shoved her brush into the pack, then looked around to see what was going on. Finding everyone settling in for their own meals, Ino shook her head and pulled her knees up, resting her chin on them, staring at the fire. She was starting to doze when Hate decided to speak up, his voice jarring her back into the real world. Joji-san, would you mind telling us a little bit about what is going on? Interest piqued, Ino shifted her attention to the heavy-set man who looked startled. He nodded after a moment, then set his own meal aside before clearing his throat. Of course, the headman said, looking up, his face highlighted oddly by the flames. Well, the village is located on the edge of an ancient forest that surrounds the ruins of an old castle. The village has served as a trading center for the local logging crews, and it was doing very well. Everybody was happy and safe. Then about 6 months ago there were random disappearances. At first a hunting party here or a farmer and his family there. Oh, and you didn't tell anyone sooner? Naruto demanded heatedly, only to have Joji brush him off calmly. People disappear quite often. They leave for other villages or sometimes fall into the ravine that isolates our village, or get caught in a rock slide in the mountains that back the forest. Joji shrugged, shifting his gaze back to Hate. However, when the flow of wood began to disappear, we grew extremely worried and searched the camps. We found nothing, no clues as to where they went, just empty camps. A perfect example of a C-ranked mission. Hate nodded, coughing before he settled down. So why did you upgrade the level? There were several reasons. The main reason, however, was the village elders' urge for it, since the merchant guilds were getting very unruly. An example of this was that one guild hired several freelance fighters, who turned out to be nothing more than bandits. Joji shrugged, sighing. I was forced to upgrade the mission, though I highly doubt it's B-ranked. I even explained that to the man that I spoke to, and he agreed. So that is why they allowed my team to continue the mission despite its rank. Hate mused, glancing at the three genin. Well, I think we'll be able to handle things. After we reach the village, we'll decide what to do. Ino sighed and closed her eyes, thank the gods that it wasn't raining. Then she felt a drop of water on her forehead, followed by another, and she sighed. Of course. The ropes creaked as the rope bridge swayed over the deep ravine, whose bottom disappeared into a thick fog, while ahead just barely visible were the craggy mountain peaks that overlooked this stretch of land. Hate paused, clutching both sides of the bridge, following the mountain range until it disappeared from sight due to distance. The mission report hadn't been lying. This village really was isolated. Shaking it off, he started forward once more, keeping a close eye on the creaking boards and the 4 people in front of him. Joji was taking things slow but confidential. Naruto was grumbling but otherwise behaved. Ino was silent, her hands clutching the ropes, and Shino was walking calmly. He really hoped that they didn't overtax this bridge. He had no desire to find the bottom of the ravine. He hated to think of how anyone ever managed trade with such a bridge, especially a logging village. It presented a problem, at least until Hate realized the simple solution. If the forest butted against the edge of the ravine, then a simple pulley system could be set up and the logs could be sent across to an awaiting wagon from the customer. It would be simple, direct, and most importantly, it would keep their monopoly on the logging trade. Stepping off the bridge, following Shino, Hate paused, glancing at the 2 haggard-looking men on either side. Obviously an attempt at keeping the bridge in the village's control, the men offered a polite greeting to Joji, and the heavy-set man returned it warmly. Hate took the moment to study the layout of the land, noting that the forest would block any direct line of sight with the bridge. Well, shall we? I'm sure we're all ready to be in Jinchuuriki, Joji suddenly said, his tone more energetic as he set off at a brisk pace. Ino groaned before staggering after the man, which worried Hate. He had known Ino had lower stamina and chakra than the rest of the team. She barely put any effort into her training after all, but he had thought she was at least tough enough to handle a bit of a march. Naruto was practically bouncing with each step, which according to the Kusa mission report he had read, was to be expected. Ino, however, was almost dragging her feet, forcing Hate to consider options. If he tried to force her into training, she might give up. He would have to speak with Yugao and see what she could suggest. Kami, how he hated having girls on his team. He was never sure how to handle them. Of course, if she could find some sort of motivation, he would have nothing to worry about. Coughing, Hate frowned. Well, Ino had shown some interest in Kenjutsu. Maybe if he spoke to her about it again she would ask for him to train her. He hoped so. She would be perfect for it since Kenjutsu required very little stamina compared to Taijutsu and Ninjutsu. We're almost there now, Joji said brightly from the lead, picking up the pace. Hate remained silent, putting the TS about Ano out of his mind and instead thought about how best to go about this mission. Gathering information would be needed, stuff that Joji left out since headmen almost always omitted something. Nodding to himself he relaxed, pleased when they finally swung north and then back south so that the village was suddenly within sight. It was located in a pleasant-looking valley, with high walls made of what appeared to be only recently seasoned timber with sharp points. Obviously they were designed to deter either animals or humans. The gates looked solid, with sentry slits. Following Joji, Hate was unsurprised by the security both visible and invisible. The genin however seemed unaware of how many eyes and arrows were targeted on them at that moment. Except Naruto, who gave an empty patch of the village wall a middle finger as he walked. Drawing to a stop before the wall, they watched as a man's head suddenly appeared above the wall to stare down at them. Joji-san, is that you? Yes, Saki-san, Joji said tiredly, wiping at his forehead with his rag. Isn't that obvious? Sorry, Saki said, cheeks flushing faintly. Then clearing his throat he spoke up. I need the password for this week. Aki, if you can see it is me, and these are the Konoha ninja, must you insist on this? Joji asked, his tone exasperated. Yes, sorry, Joji-san, but you were the one that told me to do this to everybody, Aki said apologetically. Fine, Joji muttered, glancing at them before shuffling forward to whisper the word through the gate to whoever was on the other side. Seconds later Aki disappeared behind the wall before reappearing. 1 minute. He must have broken something to be this proper, Joji muttered before brightening as he gestured with an expansive hand as the gates swung open. Welcome the village of Jinchuuriki. Hate followed the others inside, followed by Joji and the closing the gates. The Jonin had expected as much. The streets were almost empty. The buildings seemed solid enough, but there was obviously very little business going on with the loss of the loggers. Besides that, there was a sense of despair blanketing the area. The few people on the street were jittery, and their eyes kept darting all around them searching for the hidden attackers that plagued their lives. They were all on edge, which seemed to put the 3 young ninja on edge as well. Hate had seen this sort of thing before, so he merely turned his attention back to an expectant Joji. I see what you mean. Once we've had a chance to rest properly we'll set out and take a look around, Hate said, coughing before he glanced causally in a random direction. Joji nodded and turned, gesturing for them to follow him once more. Of course. We've selected the best and we could for your use. It's on the north side of the village, isolated and secured. It also has a hot spring that bubbles from the rock into a natural bath. Hate noted Ino's sudden upswing in attention and repressed his sigh. A minute later they were standing at the doorway of the room inside a medium-sized inn that looked almost unused. The room itself was small and rather meager compared to other inns, but it was well kept and clean. It also was warm, which was a plus since the nights were growing steadily colder. On the clean, hardwood floors, rested 2 neatly made futons, one of which rested under the only window in the entire room. Hate nodded to himself, turning to face the 3 genin that were hovering near the doorway. Ino was glaring at Naruto, who was talking animatedly with an impassive-looking Shino. Maybe it was time that they were sent far away, or at least far enough away that Hate could concentrate on things. Why don't you 3 go get dinner? Hate finally offered, coughing yet again. I'd like sushi. Why do we have to do that? Naruto piped up, disagreeable as always. Hate repressed his sigh and instead slipped his pack off and placed it on the futon near the window. Because you might also learn some information that Joji-san didn't want to share. Seeing the recognition on the blonde's face, Hate breathed easier, or as easy as he could considering his health. Do you really think that Joji-san was keeping something from us? Ino asked curiously. Surprisingly, it was Shino that answered. Of course. Everyone keeps something from people they shouldn't. Hate only coughed, which earned him disgruntled looks from the genin before they left. In the gathering gloom just before sunset, a small side gate opened noiselessly as the guard deliberately turned his back to allow a lone figure, dressed in a traveling cloak, to slip unchallenged out of the village and into the silent forest. The figure, a bald, heavy-set man, hurried among the trees, keeping his cloak around him tightly. The figure moved quickly and sure-footed through a maze of paths, barely disturbing a leaf. He had been one of the village's best hunters when he had been younger. Finally, after several long minutes, in which the gloom of the forest had deepened, he reached the prearranged location and stopped. "You're late, Joji-san," a deep voice said hidden among the shadows of the nearby trees. Joji turned toward the voice, his face set into a slight scowl. "I can't leave just whenever you like, there are problems I have to handle. Things that must be dealt with before dash." "Yes, yes," the mysterious man, dressed in a hooded cloak said, stepping into view. "We have noticed that. You brought more people in." "I had no koik dash." Joji started to protest until the man cut him off. "We asked you to keep outsiders away for the moment." "Which I told you was impossible," Joji snapped. "However, these people are unique. I think she'll forgive me for these interesting people." "Define interesting," the mysteriously hooded man responded. "Ninja." "Ninja?" "Yes." Joji nodded anxiously. The hooded man paused, as if listening to something, then turned as if to leave. "Then we will let you live." "Let me live?" Joji paused, smiling faintly. "You are so gracious." The man tensed, turning to stare at Joji intently. "Do not make the mistake that you are beyond our touch. She is free and there are always those that are willing to serve her." "Oh, I am sure," Joji said, lifting his chin defiantly. "However, I am Minamoto Yakanada no Joji, last surviving heir of the Minamoto clan. Do not forget with whom you speak." The man was silent for several long minutes before he spoke, his tone oddly amused. "Do not worry, Minamoto Yakanada no Joji, either she nor I shall forget with whom we speak." Chapter 9: Dire Discoveries. The countryside of Fire Country was very beautiful in the morning. Idyllic was the word most often used. The way the reds and blues mixed, bringing out the dark green of the forest. Even more enchanting was the stillness of the forest floor and how, if you were lucky enough to be strolling early in the morning, you could stumble across a deer. Yes, idyllic was the word to use. Not that Naruto cared. As far as the blonde was concerned, the animals and the sunrise could jump off a cliff and die. All he wanted was to be curled up under a warm blanket, sleeping like a log. Yawning, he stumbled, but caught himself and kept moving, keeping his place in the diamond formation, while wondering why they had to start so early in the morning. They had been out here for a week, and so far they had found several empty camps, but no clues. Would it really make any difference if they checked out these abandoned camps later in the day? He wasn't asking for sunset, but damn it, would noon have been so bad? He would have asked hate, but just couldn't bring himself to. Silently cursing the man, Naruto tried to force himself to stop thinking about it, but, like anyone that tried to avoid thinking about a certain subject, Naruto couldn't help it. Ino was one thing. He expected her to treat him this way. After all, she had never treated him all that well. Shino ignoring him was nothing new either. After all, the odd boy had ignored him and everyone else for as long as Naruto could remember. That didn't mean he liked it, however, and the more he dwelled on it, the more aggravated he became. He couldn't wait to get back to Konoha so he could work with Enko, pain or no pain. At least she listened to what he had to say. He felt a chill race along his spine as he realized what he had just thought. Frowning, he shook all of that off. He needed to concentrate on the mission. He was so caught up in that strange paradox he almost crashed into the group as the team came to a sudden halt. It took some quick work, but Naruto managed to land without doing anything to give Ino an excuse to ridicule him. Grumbling, the blonde crouched, wondering at the strange look on Hyatt's face, then looked down at the camp and froze. Unlike the other camps, which had looked nothing more than abandoned, this one was in ruins. There were tattered tents and debris scattered all over the place. Naruto started taking those stories about demons the old men had told him in Jinchuuriki seriously. He just couldn't see any animals or ninja totally ruining a camp like this. "Hyatt-sensei, what happened?" Ino asked after a moment, her tone uneasy. I'm not sure," Haidt said, crouching down, studying the camp intently. "This is very unusual." "This is. Could it have been some sort of wild animal?" Ino suggested in confusion. "Like a pack of wild dogs?" "I don't think so," Haidt said, coughing softly. Naruto, can you create a couple of Kage Bunshin to check on things?" Naruto nodded. Putting his personal feelings aside, he did just that, sending in 3 Kage Bunshin before glancing at Haidt in curiosity. "So why'd you want me to make the clones?" In case that enemy ninja were behind this," Haidt explained. "They might have left a trap. This way a Bunshin can set it off and we can avoid losing anyone." "Oh. Wait a minute," Ino interjected. A bunshin is just an illusion, so, how can it set off a trap? Well, these are kage bunshin, Hate explained, coughing as he stood. This is an advanced technique used for various functions, primarily spying. That still doesn't explain how it works, Ino responded, snorting. The technique creates physical bodies that are indistinguishable from the user, Ino-san, and any information they gather is sent back instantly to the user once they disappear. Hate sighed before leaping into a nearby tree without another word. Naruto, however, remained where he was, surprised at the knowledge he had just learned about his signature technique. He wasn't so distracted, though, that he could miss Ino's snort or Shino's odd glance before both followed Hate into the other. Why hadn't Enko ever explained that? All she had ever been interested in was making sure he could use his chakra more effectively. Filing that information away for later, Naruto followed the rest of his team. Damn forest, Ino muttered, surreptitiously pulling at her purple top to stop it from sticking to her. First there had been rain, and then the sun had decided it was time to show up, and now she was sweating so badly that her clothes were sticking to her. The forest shade wasn't helping to cool things off either, and she just thanked the gods that she had decided on wearing a sleeveless top. Glancing at her three male teammates, Ino honestly couldn't understand how those three could wear such hot clothing. Didn't they understand that they were running a high chance of heat exhaustion? Maybe they just didn't feel the heat, but she found that impossible to believe, especially with the way that Naruto kept wiping at his face every few minutes. For a moment she felt like saying something, but decided that, even if he was a perverted idiot, even he deserved to be left alone in this heat. Shaking her head, Ino turned her attention back to the tree limbs passing beneath her, working twice as hard to maintain her pace. They had only been on the move for 2 hours, ever since the discovery of that first ruined camp, but she could already feel her body starting to wear down. Ino masked her groan as a sigh, wishing she had more stamina and chakra, even though she had already accepted that she was possibly one of the weakest people out of their graduating class. Thinking of weak people caused her to glance once more at Naruto. A little over a week ago, she would have said he was the weakest one from their class. However, it had become obvious to her that he had stamina and chakra galore, at least one advanced jutsu, and no problem with tree walking or climbing. Ino grudgingly began to accept the possibility that Naruto could be as strong as Sasuke. Tiredly, she looked ahead once more, studying the gray of Shino's jacket and the green of the forest as they darted through the trees. The only sound was the rustling of leaves, the twang of a tree branch, and the occasional muttered curse, which ultimately started to annoy Ino more than anything. It was too silent, which meant it was boring, and Ino was not a person that could stand boredom for long. Which meant, naturally, that Ino had to decide how to stop herself from getting bored. She could try to talk with Shino, but the boy really wasn't much on conversations. She could try to talk with Hate, but he tended just to cough, say a few words, and then let her carry the conversation. She could talk with Naruto or, more to the point, aggravate him and, thus, get into an argument which would be fun, but pointless. Or she could play a game she had created shortly after meeting her new sensei. She had yet to name it, but it really was quite simple. All she did was take a person, usually male, and apply her fashion-conscious mind toward finding the proper look for them. Ino smiled to herself, deciding that the game would be the best choice, which meant she now needed a subject. Sadly, her subject choices were severely limited. Ino had already decided that Shino had a good look and that Hate would look best in black and green instead of all green. Which meant she really had only one other person to select for her game. Ino grimaced just thinking about Naruto, or, more correctly, his orange jacket, but she glanced at him anyway to memorize certain things she needed to get the proper picture. After several minutes of intense study, she looked away, a headache starting to throb behind her eyes, and set her mind to work. First, she would select his primary color, something that would give her a basis to work from in his color scheme. Which meant she needed to select the easiest of the 3 primary colors to work with, red. More precisely, she began with orange and started darkening it through various shades of red. That, however, produced an even worse look for him than orange, which she had not even thought possible. Undaunted, she decided to replace red with blue and began working her way through the various shades. Aqua, azure, cerulean, indigo, navy, turquoise. None of those produced the right result either, which irked Ino slightly, but she soldiered on, switching the blues for yellow. She got as far as canary yellow before she felt her headache worsen, and she quickly switched to the secondary colors, starting with purple. Ino, however, made a very annoying discovery: purple wasn't working. He looked horrible in mauve, violet, and any other shade. That should have been impossible. After all, he had blonde hair and blue eyes. He should have at least looked natural in that color. Instead, to her horror, he looked like a fat man in a pair of Speedos. Angry, she moved on to the other secondary colors, skipping brown completely in favor for green. She got as far as olive green before she realized that it wasn't his color at all. Frowning, she wondered what else to try and decided that maybe gray was the key. After several attempts at picturing him in gray colors, she decided that color wasn't for him either. Which left her with only two options, white and black. Realizing just how difficult this would be, Ino paused her game to consider why the others had failed. Thankfully, she had plenty of time since Hade had told them they wouldn't reach the next campsite until later in the day. It didn't take her long, now that she was thinking about it, to figure out what the problem was. His hair was a brighter blonde than hers, bright yellow instead of pale yellow, and his blue eyes were brighter. Which meant almost any primary color on him would be a horrible choice, unless it was a neutral color. Ino carefully weighed both white and black, and then settled on black. Concentrating, she pictured him in jet black clothes and was startled at just how well that color worked. His blonde hair stood out boldly and his eyes seemed even brighter. It was the perfect primary color for him. Then, as she stared at this mental image, she found herself making a realization that quickly made her stop playing the game. Shaken, she felt eyes on her and glanced at the blonde in question, and found him giving her a curious look. "Why the hell are you looking at me?" Ino snapped. "'Cause you kept looking at me," Naruto retorted. "Only because I couldn't believe how disgusting you were," Ino shot back. "At least I'm not so UG-. Naruto started to say, only to have Hate cut him off. Naruto-san, Ino-san, please be quiet. We could be surrounded by enemies and I would like to hear their approach instead of your bickering," Hate said, followed by a soft cough. Naruto grumbled heatedly, shooting her another look before he turned his attention away from her. Ino sighed, looking away as well, glad that neither one had seemed to notice the faint tint in her cheeks. "Kami-sama helped me, but he was cuter," Ino muttered softly to herself, unable to believe that for 1 minute she had thought that Naruto was cuter than Sasuke. Landing adroitly, Naruto glanced at Shino, Hate and Ino before starting off on his own, wandering through the debris of the camp. This was the 5th camp they had visited today, and just like the others it was in ruins with no discernible reason. Even his Kage Bunshin, which had become standard procedure, could find no traps. Not that Naruto expected to find any. He was convinced this was the work of forest demons of some sort. Kneeling next to an overturned field kit, he studied it for a moment, then glanced over at the others, watching as each one went about searching for a clue. He frowned, watching Ino for several minutes, wondering why she was apparently going out of her way to avoid him. Not that he was going to complain about that, but this seemed like something different than what he was used to. Maybe there was something wrong with her. Naruto frowned a bit more. As much as he disliked her, he was the only one that seemed to notice anything wrong. Could he just be imagining things? Shaking his head, he stood, preparing to confront her when he froze, feeling as if something was watching him. Turning, he scanned the area around him and then, for no discernible reason, he started walking toward a clump of trees. He felt like he was being drawn towards something, like there was something that was nagging at the edge of his mind. He paused, looking around, then continued on his way, moving uncertainly towards what, he had no clue. Frowning deeply now, Naruto followed this odd feeling of familiarity. It was like there was a part of him trying to remember some half-forgotten memory, but he couldn't figure it out. Shaking it off, he came to a stop in front of the trees and knelt at what appeared to be a patch of normal ground. He started to leave, but then part of him insisted that he checked it more closely. Pulling a kunai, he studied the undisturbed ground, straining his eyes. Just as he was about to give up, he hesitated, wondering if he saw a groove there or not. Using a finger first, he traced the edge, discovering a strange thin film, which prompted him to use his kunai. Slipping the kunai into the groove, he applied pressure for several minutes until he was finally rewarded with a lid of sorts popping open. Using his left hand, he leveraged it up, staring into the odd tunnel. He was getting a bad feeling from this thing, but as far as he could tell it was merely the entrance to an underground storage area. Should he tell Hate about this or go down by himself? Hate would say he should be told, but he could feel his instincts say that he should go alone first. "Naruto, we're leaving!" Ino suddenly shouted, and Naruto jerked, startled so much that the kunai slipped and the lid slammed shut. Turning, he focused on Ino, who was waiting on him impatiently while he could see Hate and Shino already on the move through the trees. "You don't have to shout," Naruto shouted back, climbing to his feet and glaring at her out of habit. He was actually surprised she had bothered to wait on him, and he didn't want to piss her off too much. "Look who's talking!" Ino snapped at him, crossing her arms. "Come on, Hayate-sensei wants to check out one more camp for the night." Naruto grumbled, but stood, wondering why she was suddenly being so nice to him. Well, nice for her at least, it was still downright hostile by other people's standards. Still, Naruto decided as he moved toward her, no point in wasting her sudden bout of kindness. He was halfway to her when he felt something and paused, turning to stare at the area behind but found nothing but empty air. "What the hell?" Naruto muttered, scratching the back of his head in confusion. "Like, are you coming or not?" Ino demanded curtly, which snapped him out of his confusion. Grumbling, Naruto hurriedly reached her side, then gave one last glance behind him to double-check. "Come on, hurry up, idiot," Ino said as she jumped into the tree behind them and took off. Naruto followed suit and was soon pacing beside her, while Hate and Shino maintained their lead. Are you always this slow?" Naruto asked after a moment. "Oh, is this too slow for you?" Ino shot back unexpectedly. "Okay, Baka, try to keep up then." That said, she increased her speed, darting several trees ahead. Naruto blinked, wondering where the hell she had gotten that burst of speed from. Then he grinned, deciding to prove just how awesome he really was. It took only a little concentration, and then he was darting after her, covering the distance she had gained in a matter of seconds. Pacing her for a moment, he took a sort of entertainment from her surprise, then he stuck his tongue out, returning her earlier jab tit for tat. "Okay, Piggy, now you try to keep up." That said, he pulled ahead of her easily, listening to her curse as she struggled to catch up to him. "Ha! That should show her." Grinning, Naruto filed away this victory for future remembrance and instead concentrated on other matters, such as Sakura and his future as Hokage. Feeling doubly pleased, he added some acrobatics to his leaps, only stopping when Hate told him to stop clowning around. Grumbling at the unfairness of it, Naruto glanced behind him to see Ino trailing after them. The look on her face promised nothing but violence. Feeling guilty, he dropped back, remaining out of her reach, but close enough that she wasn't traveling alone. Her glare almost made him wish she had stayed up there with Hate and Shino. Still, if she got exhausted then she could get killed, and for the moment she was his teammate. "Hey, you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine," Ino muttered, glaring at him. "Are you here to, torture me some more?" Ino suddenly demanded, startling Naruto. Naruto blinked, staring at her, then realized that maybe his showing off just now in his little race with her wasn't the right thing to do. Still, the way she was glaring at him. Well, it was her fault. She had started it. Then he remembered what Irika had told him once. "It doesn't matter who started it. What matters is how you handle it." Damn it! Naruto cursed, wishing he could have not remembered that. "Heh, sorry to ruin it for you," Ino grumbled, her breathing getting labored. "You're the one that started the damn race," Naruto said defensively. "Race?" Ino deadpanned, staring at him. "I wasn't racing, and even if I did, you were the one that started it. Are you always this slow? Remember?" Naruto coughed. Oh yeah, he had said that. Suddenly, he realized that Ino was slowing even more, and he followed suit, which earned him a strange look from Ino. "What?" "I'm just, trying to figure out what the hell you're doing. I'm making sure you're okay," Naruto said, wondering what her problem was. "Yeah, sure. Look, maybe we don't like each other alright, but we are on the same team," Naruto said, rolling his eyes. "Geez, what is it with you? I didn't know you cared," Ino said sarcastically. Naruto sighed and just stayed quiet. It was his fault, after all, and besides, like he had told her, they were teammates. Still, he couldn't wait for this damn mission to be over so he could get the hell away from them. To say that Ino was put off was an understatement. After all, Naruto's apparent concern for her had held steady for the last 2 hours. Even after she had told him she was fine, even after she tried to pull ahead, Naruto wouldn't let her get away from him. He stayed out of her reach, a wise move she thought, but he kept pace with her no matter what. It thoroughly confused her, and she kept reminding herself that he was really just a perverted idiot. On the other hand, she took some comfort in the fact that Naruto was more interesting to travel with than Shino was. After all, Naruto was always willing to bicker and argue with her. Ino was so lost in her own little world that she just barely brought herself to a stop before she slammed into Shino. She teetered for a moment, and then caught her balance. Grumbling, she glared between Shino and Hyatt's shoulders to stare at the final campsite for the day. It, like the others, was in ruins, but it seemed fresher to her, more recent. Still, it reaffirmed her thought that a camp full of loggers should have at least managed to kill something. Looks the same as the last few, Haidt said softly, studying the camp intently. Naruto-san? Seconds later there were 3 soft pops and 3 orange blurs were hurtling into the camp. Ino shifted her weight slightly, wondering why they even bothered with those damn things. It wasn't like they had ever found a hint of a trap. All clear, Naruto finally said, his tone bored. All right, same as before. Shino with me, Ino you're with Naruto, Haidt said, and then, as all 3 genin nodded, he led the way into the camp. Shino landed and, regaining his balance, started searching the immediate area while Haidt went to the left, leaving Naruto and Ino to take the far side of the camp. Letting Naruto move away from her slightly, Ino went through the motions wanting to find something, but lacking the energy for an actual search. She mused idly with accepting Naruto's theory, but then decided that was insane. Ino was not about to buy Naruto's insane theory about demons eating people's souls. The blonde was so damn gullible it wasn't even funny. Imagine believing a bunch of old men's stories about demons in the forest. Shaking her head, she started searching in earnest. Sifting through the ruined tents and overturned carts, she felt the annoying beginnings of hunger pains. Oh great, just what she needed. Standing upright, Ino opened her mouth to say something to Haidt, only to stop short when she heard the sound of something rushing through the forest. Turning, she strained her eyes, trying to figure out what was charging around in there, her hand even going so far as trailing to a kunai for protection. Unable to make anything out, she marked it off as her imagination and turned just as something suddenly slammed into her from the side and knocked her to the ground. "Ya!" A deep voice shouted from over her. Ino was reeling from the impact and couldn't quite gather what was happening. Then, suddenly the weight was taken away and she sat up, cheeks red from anger and embarrassment, surprised to find Haidt and Shino subduing the person that had slammed into her. The guy was babbling insanely. His teeth were yellowed and his skin held a sickly pallor. Ino couldn't help but grimace, realizing that had been what tackled her. Climbing to her feet, she dusted herself off, glaring at the man. "Get away! You gotta get away! Take me with you!" Ino shook her head, glancing at Shino who had raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Suddenly the man's fear morphed almost immediately into hope as he grasped Haid's hands while looking around at them excitedly. "Thank the kami for you, for all of you. This is great. I hid, but they kept hunting and I knew they knew where I was. Oh, they thought I didn't, but they did. Listen, can you tell us anything about who's been attacking the loggers?" Haidt asked calmly, a hand on the man's shoulder. Ino watched the sheer terror that filled the man's face, followed by spittle forming at the corners of his mouth. A paroxysm of insane laughter shook him, and he shook his head. No. Can you lead us back to where you were attacked? Haidt started to ask, only to stop as he realized the man wasn't moving. Ino backed away slightly, surprised at the sudden silence. What the hell had happened? Haidt stood, his face serious. Dead. Coughing, he turned, staring at his team. We're going back the way he came. Maybe we'll find out what's going on. Oh, but what about this? I think I found a clue, Naruto suddenly said, waving a large something in front of him. What is that? Haidt asked, blinking as he grabbed the boy's hand to hold it still. I think it's a spider's leg, Naruto said excitedly. It looks more like a piece of Konoha bamboo, Ino responded, studying the long spiny object in the blonde's hand. It is not, Naruto shouted defensively, pulling the item away from Haidt. Like you're not going to say that these demons of yours are giant spiders, are you? Ino rolled her eyes. Why not? Naruto retorted excitedly. Look, if they're demonic spiders then oh, give it a rest. Those old men were just telling, like tall tales. There are no demons eating people's souls. Ino retorted, cutting the blonde off. But Naruto, listen to what you're saying. Ino demanded, narrowing her eyes. Giant demonic spiders are killing people and eating their souls. Does that sound even remotely sane? Or are you stupid? Naruto suddenly barked back, waving the object at her. The Kyuubi was a giant demon fox. What makes giant demonic spiders any less possible? Because there's no such thing as a giant spider. Ino shouted back. Actually I have seen large spiders before, within the forest of death. Hate suddenly interjected. It could be a group of Neens that are using giant spiders. Like how my family uses bugs? Shino suggested calmly. Ino fumed, glaring at the other two. It was taking all of her will not to shout at them for obviously siding with another guy. She managed it, however, giving a disdainful sniff. Well, it's still not a demon. It is highly doubtful that a demon would take the shape of a spider. However, at least now we know what we are dealing with. Hate said before coughing. We need to hurry, the sun will be setting soon. Ino grinned victoriously at a crestfallen-looking Naruto who grumbled as they jumped into the trees to follow the man's path. We've lost the trail. Hate muttered, crouching down. Stay close. The map Joji-san gave us shows we're close to the edge of the ravine. Naruto nodded, resisting the urge to mutter in annoyance. It had been hours ago, when they had their first big lead, that Logger had left an obvious trail. But now there was nothing. Glancing around at the small natural clearing, the blonde felt something creeping up the back of his neck. It was like when he found that storage tunnel, or even that spider's legs. He didn't care what Ino said, a part of him was shouting that there was something unnatural in the area. Shaking it off, he glanced at Ino, who was carefully inspecting a set of trees. Then Naruto glanced at Shino, who was frozen for some strange reason. That's weird, Naruto muttered, moving toward the boy. If Shino had frozen up, that could spell disaster for the team, much as Naruto's own experience with freezing had taught him. Reaching the other ninja's side, Naruto paused, looking around before talking. Oh, are you okay? Shino didn't speak. He didn't move. His attention seemed to be fixed on the forest floor for some reason, and Naruto followed his gaze, noting odd indentations. That weird feeling washed over him, and Naruto was just preparing to kneel and check out the indentations when Ino suddenly shrieked, distracting him. Snapping his head around, he saw her jumping backwards as 5 large spiders dropped to the ground from overhead. Oh hell dash! Naruto started to say, only to jump backwards as well, carrying Shino with him, as the ground in front of him suddenly exploded upwards and another large spider came into the open. Landing, Naruto's eyes darted everywhere, his mind almost frantic at the sight of such massive creatures surrounding them. They're all around us! Thanks for the warning, Mr. Obvious! Ino shrieked, a note of hysteria in her voice. Then, as one, the spiders attacked. Aim for their weak points, Hate said, his sword hissing as it left the sheath to meet the spider's head on. Right. Naruto shouted, ducking under one of the spiders as it lunged. On instinct, the blonde produced a kunai, plunging it into the creature's stomach and heaved. Casting the monster aside, he glanced left to see Hate slashing through the monsters with ease. Nothing's working! Ino shouted, and Naruto looked at her. She was struggling desperately, mostly just fending off the seeking fangs of the spider that was stalking her. Try their bellies! Naruto shouted, and then, realizing she wasn't paying attention to him, he grabbed a kunai and an explosive note. Looking up, he timed it just as the spider in question was leaping at her, and fired off his explosive kunai. Seconds later, the spider exploded in a shower of gore, and Naruto started to work on more of his explosive kunai, ignoring Ino for the moment. Naruto was so intent on this task that he was caught utterly flat-foot as the spider leaped at him. Then it was his turn to be showered in gore. Blinking in surprise, he looked around to find Ino glaring at him as she prepared even more kunai. Naruto, however, grinned before remembering Shino. Spinning, the blonde felt his breath itch. There was the boy, in the same place as before, only now there was a spider slowly stalking towards him. Naruto moved as if to launch an exploding kunai, only to have the spider sliced in half by Hate. Then, seconds later, the man was pushing off the now dead spider to gain height, and twirling his blade in an odd fashion before the few remaining spiders were sliced into gory chunks. Landing, Hate crouched, glancing at Shino before speaking. Is everyone okay? Like, I could seriously use a shower. Ino answered disgustedly, shooting Naruto a dark glare. But yeah, I'm fine. Naruto, however, was looking around, grinning slightly. He couldn't wait to tell Enko about this. Then he heard Ino scream and he blinked, watching as the single largest spider he had ever seen came lumbering out of the forest. If the first spiders had been the size of dogs, then the one that was charging at Hate was the size of a horse. Hate dodged left then right, knocking Shino aside as he avoided the spider. Naruto, however, was already charging forward, exploding kunai in hand. Just as Naruto threw his first volley, hate darted out of range quicker than the eye could follow. Yes! Naruto shouted happily, preparing to celebrate, since, obviously, nothing could have withstood that blast. His celebration was cut short, however, when the billowing smoke of the exploding kunai was parted, allowing a thick liquid to slam into his chest. He had time for one shouted curse and then he was pinned against the tree. Dazed, Naruto hung there until he felt something hairy brushing against his cheeks. Recovering, he looked up and discovered himself staring into the multiple red eyes and very large fangs of the spider. Naruto wasn't sure how he managed it, but he freed an arm and lashed out as best he could, warding off those sword-sized fangs. Dance of the dash! Hate started to shout, only to have the spider spin and cut him off with a blast of webbing. Naruto, frantic, began to slice himself free from the webbing, only to jerk his head up as Ino's scream rent the air. Somehow, the blonde girl had managed to grab the Jonin's sword and was charging forward, making a chopping motion at the spider. Naruto's eyes widened, wondering what the hell was going through her mind, and then cursed his stupidity, and went back to work on freeing himself. Then he heard Ino's second scream, and Naruto looked once more to see Ino sprawled on her ass, the sword nowhere to be seen and the spider hissing as it towered over her. Ino, her breath hitching, crawled backwards as fast as she could, leaving the sword she had grabbed behind. What had she been thinking? She had been terrified, watching as the spider had charged in, taking the only fighters on their team apart, and it was only when hate was taken down that her instincts had taken over. She couldn't even remember how she had reached Hate's sword or charging at the monster. All she could remember was slashing at the thing and then being knocked on her ass. Suddenly, she came to a jarring stop as she ran into a tree. It was in that moment that Ino realized that she was dead. She felt almost detached. Funny, she would have thought she'd panic more. Amazingly, it was at that moment that her mind started sending her memories. Her life was flashing before her eyes. There she was at 3, bossing Shikamaru around. The spider was getting closer. There she was helping the helpless Sakura. The monster was almost on top of her. "What is your dream?" Hate asked blandly. Ino blushed. "To get Sasuke dash." It was the orange that caught her attention. Even at twilight she couldn't mistake that orange. It hurtled through the air and slammed into the spider towering over her, and amazingly, the impact was enough to knock the monster off balance, and it toppled sideways through several trees. Landing heavily, Naruto collapsed to one knee, panting. "Naruto!" Ino choked out, but was surprised when the blonde ignored her and, instead, raised his fingers to create a small army of clones. Ino didn't see the point, but the army charged as the beast fought its way upright. "We've got to get out of here," Ino said anxiously, getting back to her feet. "I have an idea," Naruto said, panting heavily. "Naruto! We're only genins! This thing is way too strong for us!" Ino protested, staring at him incredulously. "Hayate-sensei is hurt, Shino isn't fighting, and I'm not exactly that good at combat. I'm going to be Hokage. I'm not going to run away," Naruto said forcefully, turning to fix her with an intense gaze. Ino opened her mouth to shout him down, but froze. That gaze was beyond anything she had ever seen. It was intent, it was strong, and Ino wasn't sure why. But at that moment she felt as if she was seeing some hero from a story her father used to read to her. Naruto smirked as if realizing that she had given in, and Ino felt her own uncertainty being erased. "Let's get wild!" Naruto suddenly shouted as the last of his clone army disappeared in a puff of smoke, allowing the monster freedom of movement. Ino jumped back, watching as Naruto began hurling exploding kunai at the ground in front of the spider, hurting it away from Hate and Shino. Ino watched for a moment, then, realizing what he was doing, sought her own hastily made exploding kunai to help him. The spider hissed, charging forward, only to retreat as the ground in front of it exploded. It was slow, and it was tedious, but Ino didn't stop. She just prayed this didn't backfire on them. But the longer they went, and the closer they came to the edge of the plateau, the less she doubted that would happen. The spider staggered and weaved drunkenly, severely disoriented. It lashed out with its legs, trying desperately to stop the assault. Seconds later they stumbled from the forest 100 feet from the perilously dangerous edge of the plateau. Soon, they were 75 feet, 50 feet, 30, 25, throwing her last exploding kunai. Ino paused, panting heavily. It had taken everything she had to keep up with Naruto. She just prayed it had been enough. She jerked, however, when a chorus of yaws filled the air, and Ino found herself staring at who knew how many damn clones of Naruto who were attacking head-on. It wouldn't be enough though, Ino could feel somewhere inside her. The spiders would recover soon, kill them both, that would be it. Ino watched in horror as the clones began to explode repeatedly, until only Naruto was left. This was it. First Naruto would die, and then her. Naruto, however, seemed oblivious to that fact and charged in, a shout on his lips. Ino watched as the spider lashed out to smash him alongside the head, but Naruto suddenly disappeared for a full second, only to reappear and drive a kunai into the underside of the monster. The spider reared back from the blow, hissing as it went tumbling over the edge. Ino blinked in surprise, her fear blossoming into hope. They'd get to live. You did it! Ino cheered, thrusting her hands in the air happily. Ino was so excited that she even started forward to hug the boy, but she stopped as a section of ground exploded upwards and time seemed to slow down. Ino knew what was coming before she saw it happen. 1 minute Naruto had been standing there grinning, and the next a spider was grabbing him by the legs and yanking him underground. Ino suddenly collapsed, staring at the space in abject horror. Time continued to crawl for several more minutes, and then it sped back up and Ino felt her stomach drop out of her as an enormous silence settled over the area. This was the first time she had ever seen a friend die in front of her, and she absently wondered why her cheeks felt wet. Consciousness returned to Hate in a painful stab between his eyes, making it feel as if he'd been stabbed with a chakra-laced weapon. An acrid taste was in his mouth, and his entire body was hurting. For a moment, he lost consciousness again, then he forced his eyes open. A blinding pain shot through his head, setting off a screaming of muscles through his body until he forced the pain away. Taking a breath, he rested for a moment, though his head ached abominably. Finally, his eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he realized that he had been unable to see anything during those first moments after opening his eyes. Thankfully, however, his blurred vision was sharpening to the point that he could distinguish Shino's fire-lit face. "Hate-sensei?" Shino said, his voice seeming to come great echoing distance. Hate opened his mouth, managing a croaking sound, then cleared his throat and nodded, prompting the blinding pain to return. He dominated it and sat up, knowing that it would take a few minutes for his body to block the pain yet again. Still, he needed to check on his team now, while he had the chance. Eyes sweeping the camp, he noticed Ino sitting further away from him, her eyes locked on the fire, and then noted Naruto's absence. "What happened?" Hate asked in a croaking voice, staring at Shino quietly. "I'm not sure. My Kikaichua connected to me in a certain manner, and they overwhelmed my mind," Shino explained stoically. "When I had recovered, I found you unconscious and Ino crying near the edge of the plateau." "What about Naruto?" Hate managed, gazing at Ino with an uneasy feeling of why exactly she was crying. "I could find him nowhere," Shino said before glancing at the girl. "However, she did tell me what happened. He fought using exploding notes to herd the spider to the edge where he sent it over. She was unclear what happened after that, but I did gather that he was dead." "I see," Hate said, covering his mouth as he coughed, which caused his head to explode in pain once more. After the pain lessened enough, he began to think, wondering what to do now. Things would be a bit difficult for his team, especially when it seemed he was poisoned. There was no point denying it. Without Naruto, they were nearly defenseless. However, they couldn't just abandon the mission. We have no choice then. Tomorrow, you two will have to locate and mark the enemy on the map. Are you crazy?" Ino shouted, turning toward him unexpectedly. "Naruto's dead and you're poisoned. We need to get the hell out of here. Ino-san, remember the spiders and the ninja controlling them? I doubt they'll just let us go now," Hate said before coughing once more. "We need information, and you two are best suited for gathering it. I want you to gather information. I believe that these ninja are located near or in the ruins, but I need you to confirm that. Once you have, then you are to report back to Jinchuuriki where I will have our backup waiting." Ino stared at him in disbelief, but Hate pointedly ignored her, instead focusing on Shino. By the way, where is my sword?" Shino turned slightly and then handed over the weapon, the sheath glowing slightly in the flickering firelight. Hate nodded his thanks, studying the weapon for a moment before he looked up at a sullen-looking Ino. "Ino-san, I want you to take my sword with you and use it." "What?" Ino shouted, staring at him with wide eyes. "You can't be serious. Hate, however, cut her off sharply. "You are a shinobi of Konoha. You do not have the luxury of running away. Hate paused and locked his gaze with hers. This is not a pointless deranked mission. This mission is vital to Konoha's and the Fire Country's security. You must gather this information. If you abandon this mission and reject this responsibility, then you condemn hundreds of civilians to death and waste one of our comrades and fellow shinobi's sacrifice. That said, Hate thrust his katana out sharply, his arm and shoulder flaring in pain, but he kept his face tightly controlled. Now do your duty. But I don't know how to use a sword, Ino said, taking the sword nervously. Hate coughed before giving her a reassuring smile. I have faith in you, so I know you will complete this mission, and in some way, perhaps you can avenge your fallen teammate. Well, that really doesn't help me use this sword. Ino snapped slightly. Hate was reassured at her sudden flare-up, and, after a moment of consideration, he decided on his course of action. Turning his attention away from Ino, he focused on Shino, who had seemed unbothered by the lack of attention. I'll transfer command for this portion of the mission to you. In the morning I'll head back to the village, and you two head toward the ruins. When Shino nodded, Hate handed over the map, coughing again. Make sure to rotate watches tonight. Yes, but what of Ino-san? She does have a point about not being able to use the sword properly. Hate nodded, then looked back at her seriously. I'll train her as best I can. Well, my Kage Bunshin will at least. I'm not sure how long he'll last, but he should be able to help a little. Seeing Ino's tiny nod of understanding, Hate closed his eyes and molded his sluggish chakra to create a Kage Bunshin. He tried to open his eyes to check, but his body was too strained and his mind slipped away into cold unconsciousness. Still, Hate did not sleep well. Ino wasn't sure what time it was. The sky was still dark, and for all she knew, it could be the middle of the night. Still, she moved, thankful that they had enough soldier pills to keep her going. In all honesty, she wanted to be sleeping still, and if Hate hadn't agreed to Shino's suggestion of starting now, she would have done just that. Sighing, the blonde pushed thoughts of sleep to the back of her mind, instead focusing on her remaining teammate while trying to adjust to the katana now strapped to her back. It felt odd, awkward almost, to have that sword on her body. She preferred holding it. When it was in her hands, the sword felt like a natural extension of her body. True, she wouldn't be able to use it nearly as well as Hate, but it still felt natural to her, and it offered some comfort. Reaching over her shoulder to touch the hilt, both for reassurance and to make sure she could reach it, Ino promised that, if she survived, she would get Hate to train her in kenjutsu. Confidence bolstered, Ino removed her hand and, seeing Shino come to a stop, followed his lead, crouching beside him on the tree branch. Squinting, Ino almost swore that she could see one of his bugs escape the boy's sleeve, but it was so dark she couldn't honestly say if she had or not. We'll have to wait a moment until Yuji-kun returns, Shino said softly, his dark silhouette not looking away from the sky. Ino nodded, then settled back to wait patiently. This, of course, didn't happen, and she found herself asking the one question that had been plaguing her since the attack. So why'd you freeze? I mean, like even I fought back. Shino was silent for several long minutes, and Ino began to worry she had insulted him, but she mentally argued that it was a legitimate question. I am tied almost psychically to my family, Shino finally explained, forcing an odd tremble out of his voice. I believe their fear is so great that it is actually forcing me into a near panic state. That is not good, Ino admitted, eyes wide. I agree. Shino looked at her, holding an arm out toward the forest. However, now that I know about their reaction to the spiders, I can control my own reaction to an extent. Oh, Ino said, her voice soft. Well, at least she didn't have to worry too much about him freezing up so completely again. Yuji-kun says that we should head west. He found a strange man, possibly a ninja, approaching from the east. Shino suddenly explained, his shadowy outline turning in that direction. If I remember the map Hate gave us correctly, the entrance to a cave is nearby. We should seek cover there until he's passed. Ino felt her breath hitch, staring at the boy in fear. She did not want to fight anyone. Even with the sword, she didn't want to even dream of fighting a ninja. Are you sure we can make it? Ino asked cautiously, feeling a knot of unease in her stomach. If we are attacked, we won't have much of a chance. I agree, Shino said, taking off with Ino at his side. However, I believe we can make it to the cave unnoticed, which means we will then stand a very good chance of escaping. Ino frowned, but remained silent, knowing what he had said was the truth, but fearing it all the same. Resisting the urge to touch the katana on her back, she instead checked her pouch to reassure herself that she had a few things to fall back on. Satisfied, she checked her other pouch, counting the soiled ear pills without looking. They didn't have very many. Hate refused to let them grow reliant on them or develop an immunity to their effects. Somewhat settled, Ino turned her mind toward other matters, namely the fight from yesterday. Out of everything that had happened during that fight, she wondered about Naruto's willingness to fling himself into the fight. While her hands had been shaking the entire time, Naruto had seemed like a man possessed. She had seen him fight before, from back in the academy, but this had been different, more fluid. The change was almost mind-blowing, and Ino shook her head. Obviously, this Anko Hate had mentioned was a better sensei that she ever could have imagined. "Are you okay, Ino-san?" Shino suddenly asked, his dark silhouette pulling ahead slightly. "Huh? Oh yeah," Ino said, blinking as she left her thoughts about the fight. "Hey Shino, what do you think this Anko is like?" Shino was silent for several long minutes as if pondering that question before he finally answered. "My father has mentioned her once." He fell silent, then continued, obviously struggling for the best words. "She is not a pleasant woman." "Oh," Ino managed, her mind trying to supply a mental image of such a woman. It proved futile, however, thus she snorted and allowed her mind to lapse into blankness. After what felt like several hours, she finally noticed that she could make out a few minor details of Shino and the forest around her. Glancing at the sky, she felt mildly relieved at the black sky brightening to an indigo shade. She was so enraptured with this change in scenery that she missed Shino throwing his arm out until she ran into it. She started to shout at him. His hand had came in contact with a certain part of her body, but then saw that they were suddenly facing a very large spider web. "I thought you said the caves were this way," Ino hissed, glaring at him. "They are," Shino said calmly, or at least he tried to sound calm. Ino thought she could detect the slightest tremor in his voice. "We need to go around and then continue on." That said, Shino took off at a new angle, with Ino hot on his heels. Ino, however, felt a ripple of fear race along her spine, the knowledge that Shino could at any moment freeze completely, offering her no comfort. Forcefully, she stopped thinking about that and instead concentrated on keeping pace with the boy, wondering what they would do even if they did get the information needed and were caught as they attempted to escape. The obvious answer filled her with dread, however. Since she was the least skilled at combat, she would have to escape and leave Shino behind. In essence, she would have to run away, desert her friend to save her life and the information. Until that moment, Ino had never seriously entertained such thoughts, even though Hate had told them they would face such a decision someday. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe he wouldn't freeze up, and they could both make it back to Konoha safely. "If we are forced into combat, then one of us will have to escape while the other provides cover," Shino suddenly said. "If this happens, then you should attempt to escape. I would stand a better chance in a fight than you would." "You want me to run away?" Ino asked, staring at him in surprise, wondering if he was able to read her mind. "It is often best to plan for all possible outcomes," Shino explained blandly. "We have 3 likely outcomes. First, we reach the caves, avoid the pursuing ninja, manage to gather the needed information and escape successfully. Second, we fail to reach the caves and are, thus, killed. Third, and most likely, we reach the cave, thus avoiding our pursuer, then manage to gather the needed information before one of us is caught and the other escapes." Ino opened her mouth to respond when she felt something thin brush against her shin before snapping. Coming to a halt, she turned in surprise, staring at where her leg had just passed through, wondering what she had just snapped in half. "What is it?" Shino asked, suddenly joining her on the branch she was on. "Like I thought I felt something," Ino said, shrugging as she glanced at the boy. Shino's attention, however, was focused on something behind her, something which prompted him to grab her hand and yank as he took off. "Run! Hey!" Ino shouted, then glanced behind her to see what had terrified the boy. What she saw made her feel like they weren't moving fast enough. Springing from branch to branch were a dozen large, gray spiders chasing them, their bodies growing clearer in the gloom as they closed the distance. Ino focused her attention forward once more and started pouring on the speed, almost dragging Shino behind her. "What are we going to do?" Ino panted, her lungs burning already. Damn it! From now on she was going to train more than fuss with her hair. Of course, that was if she lived long enough to train. Glancing at her partner, Ino shuddered, not even wanting to know what it would be like be running through a forest with a swarm of sheer panic clawing at your mind. The boy, however, continued to move and function as if unbothered by his bug's feelings. We run faster and head directly for a cave entrance. Shino finally responded as they both redoubled their efforts to escape the gaining spiders. Minutes later, dodging blasts of webbing, they exploded from the forest into a massive, circular plain where a series of rocks jutted out of the earth like teeth. How much further? Ino panted heavily, forcing herself to continue running alongside Shino. It is just ahead, the dark-haired boy answered, turning to look behind him as a series of explosions filled the forest. I wonder if that will stop them or... His question was answered as several spiders came hurtling out of the forest, some smoking, but most looking untouched. Ino, who had taken the moment to catch her breath, darted forward, heading for the cave mouth. For one blind moment, she realized that she had left Shino behind and even started to go back when he caught up with her easily. Focusing once more on the shelter ahead, she began to wonder if they would ever reach it. No matter how much they ran, it didn't seem to be getting any closer. Panic started to build as her ribs began to throb from the exertion. She was past the point of ignoring the pain. It was now a white-hot pain in her side. Ino was too tired even to curse about how pathetic she was. All that mattered was that she stopped long enough to recover. Shaking her head, Ino dug deep, but her body was so tired she just wanted to sleep. Did it really matter if they were killed by giant spiders? All that did matter was resting, stopping the burning in her lungs, her legs from aching and her ribs from throbbing. Then, suddenly, she tripped, stumbled and fell, skidding into the loose gravel of the cave mouth. Seconds later, the rough surface of loose rocks dug into her hands as Shino followed her. She wasn't allowed to rest for long, as he grabbed her arm and helped her up, hurrying deeper into the cave while turning to throw a kunai at the entrance. Seconds later, there was a loud explosion and the sound of great chunks of rock thundering to the floor. It took her a few minutes of breathing the stale air before she realized that they had made it to the cave, and that Shino had sealed him inside. It took several more minutes for her lungs to stop burning, and she finally noticed that any trace of daylight was now hidden from view completely. Ino had a bad feeling about this. Chapter 10: The Awakening. The first thing that Shino noticed about the cave system they found themselves in, after the absolute darkness that engulfed them, was the foul stench. He wasn't what the cause for the stench was. All he knew was that it was inciting his Kakacha family to even greater levels of panic. Their sheer combined instincts were almost overwhelming him, despite his attempts at blocking such feelings. Shino was so lost in thought that the sudden snapping sound that filled the air made him jerk. Seconds later, his eyes stung as a faint glow filled the air. That's better. Turning his head, he found Ino holding a glow stick, looking as if she didn't know whether to be angry or relieved. Putting her aside for the moment, Shino turned his attention back to the cave. The walls appeared normal, and there were a few miniature stalactites and stalagmites. It appeared normal enough, but he saw no immediate exit, which prompted him to regain his feet and begin moving about, searching. The light of the glow stick only extended so far, but he was reasonably sure that he could find his way out. It would be risk to move too far away from Ino, which meant the best option would be to coax his Kakachu out. This proved impossible. The raw panic they felt overrode any commands he attempted, which meant he was in no better shape than Ino. He amended that though quickly, remembering that she, at least, had a sword. Without his family, there wasn't much he could do. Just keeping the thousands of voices blocked off enough to allow him to function was giving him an intense headache, and making it hard to think. Like what now? Shino remained silent for several long minutes, and then turned back to face the girl. That was, indeed, a very good question. Obviously, we begin to search for a way out, since our original entrance is now blocked from us. But are we even sure there is another exit? Ino asked, climbing to her feet, holding the glow stick high. I mean, like, aren't caves isolated? No, Shino answered, frowning, though she couldn't see that. In all honesty, he knew very little about caves, but what he did know was that they honestly didn't have many options. He was more than willing to concede that entering the cave was not a good idea. Oh, Ino responded before her jaw tightened. Then what are you standing there for? I was merely waiting for you. Shino responded, arching an eyebrow before turning back to the cave and the problem set before them. Shaking his head, Shino moved forward, pleased to see the light following him which illuminated the far wall, where he discovered a narrow gap in the rock. Is that the way out? Ino asked anxiously from behind him, hovering just behind his shoulder. I am not sure, Shino answered, already thinking of how best to find out. If his family had been willing, he would have sent one of them, but they weren't, so he had to think of some other way to find out. Lowering his gaze, he spotted a rock just the right size and something clicked in his head. Stooping, he selected the rock and then tossed it, listening intently. If the passage was a dead end, then it would hit the wall, but if it wasn't, seconds later the sound of a rock clattering to the earth reached them. Well? Ino prompted impatiently. Shino remained silent, considering the various odds as best he could, and then nodded reluctantly. We have no other choice. That said, he turned sideways and squeezed into the gap, followed seconds later by a grumbling Ino. It was a strange sensation for Shino. He felt like was constantly in danger of being crushed, always in danger of his own panic adding to the panic of his Kakachu. He also noticed the gap was beginning to slope downward. It was slight, but it was definitely there. Down, down and down it went, until, finally, it widened to a full-size tunnel that allowed Shino and Ino to walk side by side. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the tunnel forked, and they were forced to stop. Okay, so now what? Ino muttered, staring between the two separate tunnels before glaring at him. Well? Without exploring both tunnels, I cannot say for certain. Shino answered, studying both intently. Well, why not just whip out those bugs of yours up and get them to look? Ino snapped. I can't. Shino responded calmly, moving towards each tunnel, attempting to find the correct path. They are too caught up in their sheer panic. It is all I can do to keep their fear and panic from swamping myself. Damn it, Ino muttered, shooting him a nasty glare before pointing randomly at the tunnel on the left. Then we should go that way, if you can't figure things out. Shino paused and then raised an eyebrow curiously. Why that tunnel? Ino, snorting, pushed past him, leading the way. Your hair. It's moving to the right. So, that means a breeze has to be coming from the left. Which denotes air. Shino supplied, following behind her, nodding to himself. Maybe he didn't have to worry so much. Ino wasn't sure how long they had been down there, hours, maybe, but what she did know was that she hated it. She had several reasons to hate it, too. First, she had a mild case of claustrophobia. Then, of course, there was the fact that they were beginning to run out of glow sticks and solidar pills. Added to this was the unknown stench that was filling the tunnels. And perhaps most importantly, the discovery of cocoon forms glued to the walls. Every time she thought about that, Ino shivered, her imagination trying to relay what it would feel like to be so helpless and dying slowly. To know at first what was happening, to feel something drinking your fluids before your heart and lungs finally gave out. To make matters worse, Ino's imagination kept picturing Naruto going through the same thing, which was enough to sicken her completely. Glancing at Shino, Ino studied him intently, wondering how he was holding up. After they had discovered those cocoon bodies, it had taken a firm shove from Ino to get him moving again. It was almost like the longer they were in the tunnels, the worse the panic became for him, not that she could tell from his expressions or body language. If she wasn't sharp and careful, Shino would freeze and get them killed, and not for the first time, Ino wished that it had been Shino that had died and not Naruto. She had seen how he reacted to these things. Naruto hadn't been intimidated at all, and best of all, he would talk to her to keep the silence from overwhelming them. Shaking her head, Ino shifted her attention away from Shino to study the pale light as it danced along the wall. The silence and feeling of dread were slowly growing until it was so thick that Ino actually began to think that this was some kind of hell. Maybe it was a punishment for her misdeeds or a wasted life. It was enough that it made her want to scream. Just as her mouth opened, and she prepared to do just that, they reached the tunnel and entered into a circular chamber where a dozen or more intersecting tunnels waited. Ino cursed under her breath, staring at each one, and then wondered which one they should take. Hell, how could she know? They weren't even able to use any of Shino's bugs to search the tunnels. Turning, she started to question the boy, only to find him glaring at something, his shoulder tense. If she didn't know better, she would have sworn he was in an argument with someone, but there was no one around to argue with. Had he finally snapped, and was now plotting her death? Then, suddenly, his body relaxed, and he turned his head to watch something move away and down one of the tunnels. Air. Shino, you okay? Ino asked hesitantly, resisting the urge to pull her sword in case he turned on her. I'm fine. Well, it looked like you were arguing with someone. I was. Shino turned to stare at her from behind those sunglasses, which she found creepy and weird. I had to shout at my family, but Chichi-chan agreed to check the tunnels for us. You mean? You got one of your bugs to go look? Ino said, blinking. Like, aren't they terrified or something? Yes. Which is why I could only get one of them to do this for me, Shino said before crouching down. It will take a while. There are 12 tunnels and only one of her. Ino shifted her weight uneasily, knowing that she had no choice but to wait and see what happened. Turning her mind away from the weight, Ino attempted to muse about Sasuke. This, however, seemed pointless. Did it really matter what he was doing while she was trapped in these tunnels among deadly spiders with an almost useless teammate? Ino knew the answer, but she thought about him anyway. It kept her busy. When Chi-Chi returned, Ino stirred long enough to ask if it was time to move, then, receiving a negative answer, she returned to thinking about the dark-haired boy that she had been crushing on since the first time she saw him. Ino honestly wasn't sure what it was, that silence or his aloofness. Maybe it was his looks or those dark eyes. She was still trying to figure out the source of her crush a few minutes later when an odd sound reached her. It echoed in the small section of tunnels. It was startling, and it was horrible. A venomous hiss, followed by the sound of something large moving through the tunnel they had just came out of. Glancing briefly at a suddenly on guard Shino, Ino gulped and then turned her attention back to the tunnel, waiting for whatever was following them. Almost absently, Ino reached over her shoulder and pulled her sword, hissing from its sheath. Grasping it like the Heid Bunshin had trained her, Ino assumed the best stance she could, preparing to use the weapon. The sounds were getting closer, and Ino strained to see past the glowstick's light, but could see nothing but darkness. The sounds suddenly faded, and Ino tensed, uncertain of what to do. Ino-san, Chi-Chi-chan says she found a tunnel that leads to something important. Ino hesitated, unwilling even to look away from the tunnel behind them. Shifting her weight and grip, she responded with an urgency she didn't bother hiding. Is it a way out? She is not saying, however, it is a possibility, Shino admitted. Ino set her jaw anxiously before she nodded and turned, heading for the tunnel Shino indicated. It was narrower than any of the other tunnels she had been in, so narrow that it was actually amazing she could still breathe. Not that breathing was a pleasant task. The air was stagnant and even richer with the mysterious stench. It was only through sheer force of will that she kept moving and kept Shino moving with her. It took several minutes, or was it hours, for Ino to realize that the tunnel was beginning to slope upwards. She just prayed it kept doing so. Up meant they were approaching the surface and possibly another exit. She was banking on that. She had only 2 soldier pills left, and she didn't want to have to use them before they escaped. Then, just as the glow stick faded out, she stumbled out of the tunnel and crashed painfully into something solid. Damn it! Ino hissed, then paused, listening to her voice echo. Blinking, she quickly fumbled through her hip pouch and grasped her last glow stick. Snapping the plastic tube, she shook the contents, replacing the darkness with a dim light that vaguely hinted at how vast the cavern she was standing in was. Turning her attention back to what she had smashed into, she discovered a column of rock. Cursing to herself, she turned away to see what her teammate was doing. Shino, amazingly enough, had lit his own glow stick and was busy moving through the cavern as if searching for something. Hey, you shouldn't be wasting that, Ino hissed, moving over to join him, thus increasing his light. The boy ignored her, and she had opened her mouth to say something else when she noticed Shino kneeling beside an oblong white shape. Is that what I think it is? Ino asked, disgust leaking into her voice. This one seems dead, Shino said after a moment, and then he turned his head, staring at something else that their combined glowsticks only barely revealed. So that is what she found. What? Ino asked, looking in the same direction, but only saw the edge of another cocoon. Shino, however, seemed to be ignoring her once more as he hurried over to it, kneeling yet again. Chi-Chi-chan said that the tunnel led to something important, Shino explained as he studied the object intently. I believe I have found what she meant. What the hell are you dash? Ino paused, however, watching with wide eyes as Shino sliced through teehee white material with a kunai to reveal Naruto's face. He looked pale. His lips were even turning blue. Shaking herself out of the shock she felt, Ino leveled a glare at Shino, wondering why the boy had wanted to find Naruto's body. It wasn't as if they could carry it out of there. Then, Ino blanched when Shino reached out to touch the boy's flesh. What the hell is wrong with you? You shouldn't be touching a dead body. He isn't dead, Shino responded calmly, hand moving to the blonde's throat. Chi-Chi-chan says that she smelt his chakra, and chakra can't exist in a dead body. He's alive? Ino blinked, suddenly kneeling beside Shino. Her mind was reeling at this development. She would have sworn that he was dead. After all, that spider had dragged him underground. Yes. Barely, but he is alive, Shino answered, using his kunai to slice at the rest of the webbing as he continued talking. Obviously, he has been poisoned. I think, however, that he was captured. Captured? Shino nodded, setting back slightly. Yes, the ninja controlling these spiders obviously wanted to understand his enemies better. So, the spiders captured Naruto, poisoning him so that they didn't have to keep a constant eye on him. So that means they'll be back, Ino guessed, glaring at Shino. What now? We can't drag him around with us. I know, was all the boy said. Well? Ino suddenly snapped, her temper rising with each minute the boy was silent. It wasn't that she didn't like knowing Naruto was alive, or even that she didn't want to take him with her, but right now she was staring at the risk of losing her own life. I could see if my Kakachu would be willing to draw the poison out of him. Shino finally suggested, a note of uncertainty in his voice. I am not sure how that would work, however. My father explained the basics only once. Well, we can't just leave him here now, Ino said, a hint of her exhaustion finding its way into her voice. That scared her. She was going to collapse soon, and those soldier pills were only going to make it worse. I know, Shino said after a moment, which was followed by a more pronounced silence before he released his own breath. My Kakachu are no longer listening to me. I cannot even shout them down so that they can hear my voice. Then what the hell are we supposed to do? Ino snapped, glaring at Shino and then looking at Naruto. She was trying to think of anything to fix this mess. Nothing was coming to mind, however. All they had were 3 soldier pills, her sword and whatever other small weapons they still had. Ino-san, can you bring your light closer please? Shino suddenly asked and Ino, grumbling, did as asked, glaring at the boy. Shino merely focused on Naruto for several minutes and then leaned back, as if deep in thought about something. Ino ignored the gray-clad boy and turned her attention back to Naruto, surprised at what she found. His skin appeared to be regaining its color, and his lips were no longer blue. Is the poison wearing off? It would appear so, Shino said softly. Ino remained silent, staring at the boy and then, remembering where she was, she glanced around anxiously. They needed to move. There was no telling when those spiders would come to repoison the blonde. Still, it was rather obvious that Shino wasn't about to leave the boy, so Ino left her glow stick next to him and retreated ever so slightly to keep an eye out for spiders. It felt like she stood there for hours, waiting for an attack that would never come. As a matter of fact, she was so intent on this imaginary attack that, when Shino told her that Naruto was coming around, she yelped and jumped. Recovering, Ino quickly moved to stare down at the blonde, watching as Naruto's face twitched and shuddered. Finally, his eyes opened halfway, and he stared up at them for several minutes in silence. Unnerved, Ino shifted her weight and froze, noticing the way his eyes flickered toward her. The look on his face was perplexed, almost as if he wasn't sure if he was awake or not. Am I in heaven? Naruto finally managed to croak, his eyes never leaving her face. No, Shino answered, stoic as ever. Is this hell? Naruto asked after a moment, continuing to stare at her, making Ino very self-conscious. Not quite, Shino answered, leaning back slightly. Oh, Naruto whispered before nodding, his gaze finally leaving Ino to settle, instead, on Shino. Then tell the pretty Kami to go away, please. That said, the blonde promptly passed out. That was odd, Shino said after a moment, his tone obviously confused. Ino nodded in silent agreement, but she felt herself blushing with the knowledge that he had been referring to her. Shino had never considered how troublesome carrying Naruto would be. After all, the boy had to weigh less than he. However, that did nothing to change the dead weight factor. The reason he was carrying the boy was really quite simple. Any time they stopped for a short break at Ino's insistence, the blonde would fall asleep, only to complain loudly when they woke him up. To make matters worse, Naruto was constantly wandering off in a daze. After a while, both Shino and Ino agreed that he should be carried so that he could sleep off whatever poison was still affecting him. It had been Shino's idea, really, and for some reason Ino declared that meant that Shino had to carry him. Since Shino was not about to leave Naruto behind, he honestly didn't have much in the way of choices. However, the worst part to Shino was the utter silence in his head. His family had apparently gone so far over the bend that they had cut themselves off from him. Of course, while this could have been good news since he didn't have to constantly concentrate on blocking their panic, Shino still couldn't concentrate. He was used to the presence of his family, and without it, he was constantly distracted and unsteady on his feet. So okay, I'm starting to wonder about these tunnels, Ino said, speaking for the first time since they had decided which tunnel to take a half-hour ago. Wonder what? Shino asked distractedly, wondering if it was just him, or if the light of his glow stick was growing brighter. Duh! Ino snorted, glancing over her shoulder. We have to have been down here, a totally long time, right? I'm starting to wonder if they actually lead to a way out or not. We are going up, Shino explained patiently. It is only a matter of time before we find a way out. I'm sure, Ino muttered, turning away to continue her silent trek along the tunnel. Shino shrugged her comment off, studying the glow stick intently. The light was definitely getting brighter, but there was no wind. That was strange to say the least. Even in the tunnels there was the occasional breeze. If there was light, there should have definitely been one, which meant they were approaching another cavern, one that had a light source. Is it me or is the tunnel getting brighter? Ino suddenly asked, but Shino merely shrugged Naruto off his shoulders and hurried past her. Hey, what's wrong with you? Yes. It is indeed growing brighter, Shino said over his shoulder, and then pushed her to the back of his mind as he crept forward. Maybe it was just a lack of his family, or maybe he was just anxious, but Shino couldn't trust this tunnel so blindly. Reaching the end of the tunnel, he froze, staring out over a vast cavern from 10 feet above the floor. Even with his sunglasses, Shino winced, not because the torches were bright, but because he had grown so used to the glow sticks. As his eyes adjusted, he saw large dark blobs. Eventually, they became vague shapes, and finally, he could make out minor details. It took him a moment to realize that what he was staring at were roughly a dozen spiders, moving around in the cavern, talking in an odd language. Or at least he thought it was a cavern until he turned his attention to the smooth walls where flickering torches resided and the equally smooth floor, which revealed that it was a man-made chamber. Frowning, he turned his attention once more to the spiders and finally allowing them to settle on a tall, hooded figure standing near an opening where a set of rough-hewn stairs seemed to reside. Shino could see nothing of the man's face, nor any marks that revealed what village this man was from. Not that it mattered since, obviously, this man had to be the ninja controlling the spiders. Looking around once more for anything he missed, he paused, noticing a familiar figure kneeling between two spiders. Frowning, Shino carefully retreated back the way he came, and thankfully, he didn't have to go far before he ran into Ino once more. The Jiro was grumbling, almost bowed beneath the weight of the unconscious Naruto. Seeing the way her eyes narrowed in accusation, he held a hand up, speaking quickly before she could. I believe the way out is ahead, but I am not certain. Could you use your clan's ability? Huh! Ino blinked, her anger temporarily forgotten as she eased Naruto off her shoulders. Well, I could, but you know I'm not psychic, right? I mean, I'd have to have somebody's head to peek into, and I'm not sure I can try that on a spider. Shino nodded, reaching out to help her. I understand. Joji-san has been captured, so perhaps he would make the ideal target. Shouldn't we, try to rescue him? Ino asked, glancing at him curiously. Shino, however, shook his head, knowing the truth more easily than she did. Even if Naruto were healthy, we would be unable to rescue him. However, if we can escape before he is murdered, we may be able to contact someone who can. But to do that, I have to peek into his head, Ino said sourly before straightening up to head toward the entrance. Oh, and Shino? Pausing, the girl turned back, a frighteningly sweet smile on her face. If you ever make me carry him again, I'm going to get the biggest damn can of insecticide I can find. That said, the girl turned and started walking. Unnerved slightly, Shino remained where he was, unsure if he should stay with Naruto or join Ino in case she needed help. If his family had still been talking, it wouldn't have taken him longer than few seconds to decide, but since they weren't, it took him several minutes before he finally hurried after Ino. He had just caught up to her, and was preparing to say something when he saw something that would have sent every bug in his body into a horrified stupor if they weren't already there. It was a spider, or at least the lower portion of it was a spider. It had 8 massive legs and a body of gray. The way it moved denoted advanced age, but what truly terrified him was the rest of the spider, which, from the waist up, was an old woman's body, and it looked every inch like the ideal grandmother. Her voice was soft, unclear, but it was obvious that she was speaking to the ninja who spoke for her. Raida-sama bids you welcome, Joji-san. It has been centuries since the last Minamoto entered this hallowed den. Joji struggled at that, and the mysterious ninja's tone became slightly mocking. What? Has Minamoto Yakanadamino Joji, the last surviving member of the Minamoto clan, lost his manners? The other spiders made clicking sounds, as if laughing, but the mysterious ninja was quiet, listening to Raida as she spoke once more. Nodding, the man reached out and ripped something, probably a gag Shino guessed, from Joji's mouth. This act was followed by the headman's loud, indignant voice. How dare you! I am Minamoto! You have no right to drag me here and treat me like some sort of animal! Raida obviously said something which the mysterious ninja nodded in agreement with. Raida-sama says you are from the clan that betrayed us. Your clan summoned us to the world, in this foul shape, to build their power, and then, when fear grew, your clan attempted to seal us away. We have waited centuries and then you freed us. For that, we would thank you. Thank me? Joji interrupted furiously. She had me dragged out of my house in the middle of the night and gagged with webbing to thank me. Do not interrupt, Raida-sama, the mysterious ninja said threateningly. She has suffered your continued life only because of the service you performed in freeing her. Well then, what the hell does she want? The mysterious ninja raised a hand, palm up, speaking calmly as ever. As I was saying, for freeing her she would thank you. For allowing her to feed so that she could bring forth her children once more, she would thank you. However, you have brought ninja into our world, and this has caused the deaths of her children. That wasn't my fault. Joji shouted angrily. How was I supposed to know that stupid Jonin would have those masked men following him? Regardless, the mysterious ninja said, waving a hand dismissively. It is still your responsibility and, as such, you must restore to her the chi she had lost with the death of those children. What? Joji shouted before suddenly going slack in the grasp of the spiders holding him. Shino blinked, wondering if the man had died, then, remembering Ino, he glanced over at her. Her body was stretched out as if she had lain down to take a nap, and he wondered about that for a split second before he realized what she had done. Mastering his body, he scooped her up and quietly slipped back into the tunnel. It would be safer, and besides, his family's silence was starting to chew at his mind. As a matter of fact, he nearly forgot what he was doing several times on the trip back to where Naruto was resting. He did make it though, and setting Ino down gently, Shino paused, wondering what to do now. It was getting harder and harder to concentrate. He just prayed it wouldn't get them all killed. Shaking his head, he settled down to wait, only to jerk at the sound of a shrieking wail that echoed from the end of the tunnel. Realizing that had to be Joji, he quickly turned to face Ino, worried that she might have not made it out of the body in time. This proved a needless worry as her eyelids fluttered open, her face twisting into a grimace. Are you okay? Ino met his gaze. It was unsettling to say the least, but she quickly looked away, her voice trembling. You were right, that opening is an exit. Is it guarded? Shino asked after a moment. By more than just the ninja and spiders we saw? Yes. Ino grated out. 5 spiders. I see. Shino replied before falling silent. He struggled with the various questions that were now facing him. Spiders that actually were demons, an exit that was heavily guarded, a mysterious ninja. So now what? Ino finally asked, and Shino looked up, seeing the way she kept her face set in a scowl. Obviously, we have to slip past those spiders and that ninja down there. Possibly if we could defeat the ninja, then we would have an easier time. Right, but how do we do that exactly? You know, since he's not really in control of those things. I don't know, Shino admitted, his voice growing slightly brittle. My Kikaichu are not talking. Without them, I can't concentrate. I doubt I can fight in this condition. Well then, what are we supposed to do? Ino demanded heatedly. I can't fight those damn things, even with this sword. Shino nodded, an idea tugging at the edges of his mind. He lowered his head, trying to bring it into focus, which took several long minutes, and then he realized what he had been trying to think of. Remember what Hayate-sensei told us before we left Konoha? Each of us has a strength. Mine was strategy. Okay, but that still doesn't tell me how Ino-san would be tactics, Shino said before glancing at Naruto. He is our tactician, so he will have to tell us how best to carry out my strategy of slipping out unnoticed. But he's unconscious, Ino hissed. Plus, even when Naruto-kun is awake, he's useless. True, Shino allowed, raising an eyebrow, noting the way she had referred to him. Ino was silent for several long minutes and then sighed, turning to the blonde in question. We don't have a choice, do we? No. Fine. Ino grumbled, and then, hauling back, she slapped him upside the head with enough power to knock the blonde over with a thump. Free ramen! Ouch! Naruto rubbed at his head, muttering curses under his breath. It was bad enough that she had smacked him, but the biggest crime was that she had taunted him with free ramen. Lowering his hand, he blinked, wondering if Ino ever needed to breathe, mainly because she was still talking and wasn't showing any signs of stopping. Keeping his silence, Naruto wondered if, maybe, he could go back to sleep without her noticing. No, that would only get her to hit him again. Are you even listening to me? Ino suddenly hissed, startling him. Yeah, Naruto said, knowing the next question and wondering what exactly she had been saying. Then what did I just say? Something about spiders, us being trapped. Naruto answered, racking his mind for more information. Lacking exact details, he gave her a hopeful smile. Oh, and something about an old lady and a ninja. For a sweet dash, Ino grumbled before jabbing a finger into his chest. Listen, okay? We are in a spider's den, miles underground, nearly out of weapons, and the mother of all spiders is blocking the way. Shino says that we have to beat that ninja if we ever want to escape, and of course he can't fight due to his connection to those bugs of his. Naruto blinked, staring at her, and then shrugged. Okay, and what do you want me to do? Figure out how we're supposed to beat that ninja and escape, duh! Ino hissed dangerously. Naruto blinked, staring at her. For a moment there, she had sounded like a snake, which was funny because he hadn't heard too many of them. Then, seeing the way she was glaring at him, he scratched the side of his head, unable to fully grasp why they needed him for this. Well? Ino hissed once more after several minutes. I'm thinking, okay? Naruto snapped back, and then, while Ino mumbled, he focused on what she had told him. Okay, so they were trapped by giant spiders and a ninja. So what did he remember about Kumoiki? Frowning, Naruto tried to remember all the stories he had ever heard when he had still been living in an orphanage. Were they the ones that ate corpses? No, those were the Jikiniki. Well, what about? No, those were the Yaramawa Ichihu. Were they the ones that liked to live in mountains and hunt children? No, those were the Tengu. Ugh! Naruto suddenly said, clutching at the sides of his head. Why couldn't he remember the stories about the Kumoiki? This meant he had bugged those bastards in the orphanage to tell him all those stories for nothing. If he couldn't remember how to beat the damn things, then what was he going to do? Then he remembered something Anko had told him back when they had first started training. You think outside of the box. Keep it up. That seemed to jumpstart his prankster streak, and suddenly he was creating a half-dozen ideas. Naruto-san, please hurry up, Shino said evenly. Gathering his strength, he used his hands to get to his knees and pushed, lifting himself upright, before he looked at both Shino and Ino, grinning. I have an idea. Great, Ino grumbled, climbing to her feet, as well. So, are you going to tell us? It's a surprise, Naruto said, grinning just a little bit larger. Kami, please don't tell me your brilliant plan is counting to 3, Ino muttered. Hey! Just trust me, okay? Naruto demanded, his grin fading as he fixed his gaze on her. Fine, Ino grumbled. Just try not to get us killed. There's a sale in Konoha I want to go to. Grinning once more, Naruto held up a scroll. Ino eyed the scroll she was holding suspiciously, then glanced at Naruto, who was busy creating a small group of Kage Bunshin closer to the entrance. What the hell did he have going on in that twisted little mind of his? She couldn't even guess. A what you see is what you get scroll and an army of Kage Bunshin just didn't add up to a good idea that she could see. Shaking her head, she studied the scroll once more, wondering what the scroll would do. Then, she looked over at Shino, who was standing close by, looking slightly lost. That was another thing that was preying on her mind. Could he really function well enough to stay with her? Yet, no matter how many times she asked Naruto, he would never tell her his plan. All he ever told her was to open the scroll and head for the exit when it was time. Time for what? Ino wondered before sighing. She would just have to leave it to Naruto. After all, unclear or not, it was the only chance they had. Taking a breath, she closed her eyes and then opened them, watching as Naruto finished talking with his clones before hurrying down the tunnel to her. You ready? He was grinning again, half prankster and half cocky. Ino wondered how he could manage that, since she felt completely overwhelmed. Naruto-san, you do have a plan, right? Shino asked carefully. Yup. Naruto nodded seriously before glancing at the clones and then back at them, his grin growing. Trying to not get us killed. Ino stared at him, and then groaned. Naruto took this as a sign that she was ready and turned, rushing to his clones. Let's kick some ass! Then, all the clones let out a roar and turned, charging to the end of the tunnel where they suddenly jumped, firing off kunai that exploded. Ino blinked, listened to the sound of chaos, and then grabbed Shino's hand and took off running, as well dropping to the floor. She took a moment to study the cavern, taking in the chaos raging all around them and the various chunks of rock that were falling. So this was his plan? Ino-san. Maybe we should open the scroll now, Shino said softly. Blinking, Ino did just that, surprised at the slight shimmering of the air around them, then even more surprised as a spider that rushed past her completely ignored them. Turning, she opened her mouth to say something to Shino, only to freeze, finding herself facing a spider. Her brief moment of panic was quickly replaced by the realization that Naruto had used the scroll to henge them both into spiders. Suddenly, Ino understood what Naruto was doing. In all of this chaos and destruction, none of the spiders would notice 2 extra spiders, which meant the ninja wouldn't notice, meaning they could escape unnoticed. It was brilliant. A sudden nearby explosion jolted her back to what was going on, and she took off, trying to act as much like a panicking spider as possible. It was hard to keep the other spiders from crashing into her and the Kage Bunshin from attacking her, plus she kept checking on Shino to make sure he was following her. Thankfully, Shino seemed to be holding up well enough, or at least his henge hadn't crumbled and he was keeping pace with her. Still, it seemed to take forever to get near that exit, mostly due to chunks of the ceiling falling all around them, but they were getting there. Slowing suddenly, Ino dodged a spider hurrying in front of her, which allowed Shino to pull ahead. Hurrying to catch up, Ino prayed that nothing happened to put them in real jeopardy. That was when she was forced to stop once more as Shino collided with another spider. Ino glanced at the exit. It would be so easy to just keep going and leave him, but could she do that? Cursing, she allowed her own henge to crumble and rushed forward, grasping Shino and yanking him up as the spider he had crashed into was rushing at them. Ino felt a tremor of fear race through her, and then something else took over, prompting her to perform 3 unexpected feats. First, she channeled chakra into her legs for a boost as she jumped, pulling Shino with her. Second, Ino twisted in the air until she was vertical and unsheathed the sword while channeling chakra into it so that the blade sliced through the monster like it was butter. Then, to complete the amazing feat, she landed adroitly with a now-recovered Shino. Ino paused for a split second, staring at the sword in awe, and then took off as Shino yanked on her hand. The rough-hewn stairs of the tunnel rose steeply, and with every stride they climbed higher along the torchlit stairway. Ino didn't even want to think about who had created them. All that mattered was that none of those spiders were chasing them. Maybe you're not such an idiot after all, Ino said to Naruto, glancing behind her only to find the blonde nowhere in sight. Suddenly, the one flaw she had never noticed in the plan hit her. Where was he? He should have been right behind them, or at least a few minutes, but she didn't feel like he was. Then, she heard what sounded like someone rushing up at them. So the idiot had fallen further behind than expected. Naruto, are you like a dash? She was cut off, however, as the sound grew closer and suddenly revealed a large spider, its fangs gleaming in the torchlight. It was an instinct that did it, or, at least Ino thought it was instinct. One moment her sword had been at her side, and the next it was plunging through the monster's head. It let out an almost deafening screech and tumbled backwards into the darkness. Ino stood transfixed for a moment, staring after it, then looked at the sword. She was broken out of her surprise when Shino jerked on her arm, dragging her further up the stairs. We need to keep moving. What about Naradash? Ino started to protest only to have Shino cut her off. I do not know. But he is stronger than either of us. Maybe he is trying to buy us time. Ino didn't believe that, but kept her peace, feeling like a coward the entire time. He wouldn't have left either of them behind, but then again, he had told them to flee, and maybe Shino was right. Maybe he was right behind them, but he was just taking his time to let them escape first. Those thoughts didn't stay for long since her body was starting to finally completely rebel against her. This was the onset of chakra exhaustion. Iruka had explained it to them often enough, and it was only because of Shino that she was even still moving. Her vision was beginning to darken, her air coming in harsh rasps, her mind starting to slip. Then, suddenly, she collapsed, making a soft sound. It took her a moment to realize that she was lying on soft grass and could feel a cool breeze washing over her. They had made it? Yes. She tried to get up, but her body refused, and her lungs felt like they were filled with water. Eyes fluttering, she drifted on the edge of unconsciousness for what felt like an eternity before she felt energy flooding through her once more. After several minutes, she coughed and opened her eyes to stare up at the person kneeling over her. He was dressed in armor, a sword jutting out over his shoulder, and a white animal mask covering his face. Ino allowed her eyes to dart from that mask to his outfit before spotting the emblazoned Konoha symbol on his armor. Who are you? Umbu. A protector of Konoha and Fire Country, the man said, his hands still glowing faintly. You are lucky that Hayate-senpai found my team. Why, how? Ino stuttered, watching as the man turned to face someone else before looking back at her. That is not important right now. Right now, I need to know what exactly happened. What about Hayate-sensei? Ino asked thickly, her thoughts jumbling now. He is fine. The village has been secured and he's resting well, the man answered her calmly. Now, tell me what happened. Ino coughed, head swimming, and she began to tell him everything she could remember, the mission, the time spent underground, and then, finally, what she had overheard when she was searching Joji's mind. Falling silent, she stared up at him, feeling as if she was forgetting something, but it was so hard to remember. We need to take them back to the village. For some reason that phrase triggered her memory, and Ino grabbed the clothes of the ANBU that had healed her, jerking his attention back to her. Naruto! The man paused, then nodded. You need to rest, but dash. Ino started to protest, only to have the man calmly reach out and touch her neck softly. Then, suddenly, her entire world went black. Watching as the last of the Kage Bunshin disappeared, Naruto cursed to himself, thankful that he could still manage the Meisai Gakur. The spiders had sealed both exits, they knew he was still there, and he was the one they wanted. Crouching down against a chunk of rock that had been blasted free from the wall, he concentrated on his breath. As long as he didn't do anything stupid and remembered what Anko had taught him, he might survive long enough to figure out a solution to this new problem. He just thanked the kami that he was so used to holding still until he figured out his next move. That didn't mean it was easy. He could try to henge into a spider, but with how iffy that was at times, he didn't want to try. Leaning against the rock, he closed his eyes, wondering what he was going to do, only to wince as he felt a sharp jab in the small of his back. Sitting forward, he turned to see what had poked him, and, as he remembered a lesson from Anko, he started to grin. Grasping the rock, he applied all of his weight, snapping the jagged point off. This, of course, alerted every Kumoiki to where he was, and they started swarming toward him. Cursing, Naruto glanced around to spot the ninja, who was staring impassively in his direction. Well, if he could only kill one thing, why not the damn ninja? That decided, he rushed toward the man, noting his plain face even as he allowed his Meisai Gakur crumble. He dodged 3 spiders and, closing rapidly, used the Hebe style to push off the ground while the makeshift rock knife arched up at the nin's chest. Just when Naruto swore that the blow was going to hit home, the man snapped his hand out and grabbed his wrist, twisting painfully. The rock knife clattered out of his hand, and Naruto grunted before lashing out with a kick to the nin's solar plexus. The mysterious nin released Naruto's wrist, inhaling sharply. Landing in a crouch, Naruto growled and then launched into another attack, only to have it dodged and countered with a jab to Naruto's face. The force of the blows sent Naruto somersaulting backwards before he smacked painfully into the rock wall of the cavern and collapsed to his hands and knees. His back throbbing, Naruto gasped in pain, raging at how the man seemed to be reading everything he did. It was like this guy had 1,000 eyes or something. Pushing himself up, Naruto charged forward, pushing off in one way and to change directions in mid-move, driving his punch into the man's chin, snapping his head back. Naruto didn't hesitate for an instant, and grabbed the man's shoulder, and yanked it down with all of his strength, forcing the man's face into his rising knee. The man stumbled back, dazed, and Naruto plunged ahead, heedless of the lack of damage. Leaping, Naruto delivered a hard front kick to the man's chest, forcing the man to stagger once more before smiling bemusedly. Naruto, of course, remained oblivious to this and just continued attacking, his attacks landing, but resulting in no visible results. Landing after his latest barrage, Naruto stared up at the ninja who was still smiling in a bemused fashion. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto prepared for yet another attack when he was forcibly reminded of the spiders. Seconds after the webbing had slammed into him, followed by 2 spiders, he was yanked into a kneeling position before the mysterious ninja. "You are a very strange child," the ninja remarked. "Screw you!" Naruto shouted in response, struggling against the webbing. "Raida-sama says that your chi is quite impressive. She will be honored to receive your gift," the ninja said as if Naruto hadn't spoken at all. "What gift?" "Your chi, of course," the ninja explained calmly. "Yes, I agree with Raida-sama, your chi should be quite delicious." "Say what?" Naruto shouted, struggling at that. He didn't know what chi was, but he understood that she was talking about eating him, and he really didn't want to be eaten. "Raida-sama must have chi, otherwise she cannot give birth to her family. Joji-san did not provide nearly enough to quench her hunger. You, however, should do quite well." The ninja sounded pleased. "It will be nice to have true brothers and sisters again." "What the hell are you talking about? She's just a damn spider!" Naruto shouted, only to have the ninja slap his cheek hard. Wincing, Naruto stared up defiantly at the ninja. "Do not dare to speak!" the ninja shouted angrily. "Raida-sama is an ancient and powerful demon, my beloved mother. She has killed men twice your size and devoured entire villages before you were born. She has terrorized the dreams of children for generations, and the form she wears now is nothing compared to her true horrible beauty." "Okay, I get it. She's evil," Naruto said, snorting. "Still a damn spider. You insolent dash!" the ninja shouted, hand rising as he prepared to strike once more, when, suddenly, he paused, as if listening to a voice. Arm lowering, he nodded, turning toward a dark section of the cavern. "Please, mother, show him your true glory." Naruto watched as the figure came slowly out of the shadows. Her face was nearly perfect, with lovely green eyes and rich black hair. Then, he saw the rest of her. His mind reeled, staring at those 8 legs and the body. It made a mockery of her beauty. He was so distracted that he completely forgot about struggling, just watched as she strode toward him with 8 sharp taps with each step. "Behold Raida-sama, mother of all spiders! The greatest demon in the land!" the ninja said, fiercely glaring at Naruto. "She who has brought greatness to some and death to others. She who shall give birth to another brood, a true brood." Naruto stared up at the kumoiki as she came to a stop near the ninja, and when she spoke, her voice was brittle and unnatural. "I thank you, most brave warrior. Your chi shall restore mind strength completely, and Monkut shall know his family once more." Naruto opened his mouth to scream, but Raidu struck like lightning, her legs lifting him up effortlessly. He thrashed uselessly before crying out as she bit into his neck. A white-hot searing pain raced through him, eradicating nearly every thought in his head. It seemed to go on forever, torturing him as he died. His vision was beginning to darken. As the searing pain began to fade, and his mind slid into silence, he felt a warmth spreading through him. It was so strange, like he was dreaming as he died. He thrashed once or twice, his mind focusing briefly on fighting back, but ultimately, his mind went dark, and all that was left was that consuming heat. Then, a part of him shifted, as if it was stirring from a deep slumber. It was malevolent and rage personified. It was evil and it roared. And something inside Naruto awoke. "Geez, why do we have to go back?" one of 2 white-masked, black-garbed men complained. "Probably because you went and said he was probably dead," his companion said blandly. "Hey! You agreed with me, though, Hiroko." Hiroko grunted in response, speeding up slightly. Hiroko, unlike his teammate Makoto, knew exactly why they had been sent back. It was actually almost obvious. At least, it would be if Makoto paid attention to things. After all, this Naruto was Mitarashi Anko's pet project. So, of course, at the first hint of Naruto being alive, their captain would send them out to retrieve the boy. The only real question in Hiroko's mind was if the blonde was still alive or not. Considering what this genin team had been fighting, he doubted it. After all, it was obvious that Kumoiki, if they really were those creatures, were well beyond genin. "Hiroko, hey, slow down, will you?" Makoto shouted, speeding up to matching his pace once more. "You should train more." Hiroko remarked tiredly. Or take up teaching. Hey, stop taking it out on me, okay? Makoto snapped, falling silent for a minute before speaking again. Do you think that girl was really telling the truth? That these are Kumoiki? I don't know, Hiroko said, shrugging. I know that the few we fought felt different than those giant spiders in the Forest of Death. So maybe they are what all those old stories based the Kumoiki on. Either way, these genin did very well in surviving inside their den. Yeah, I can see why Hayate-senpai is wanting to enter them in the Chunin exam, Makoto said. Though if he is dead, then they'll be one man short again. And a sensei, Hiroko said with dark humor. Remember, this Naruto is really Anko-senpai's student. I imagine she'll be upset if he's dead. Oh yeah, Makoto sighed, shaking his head. I had forgotten that. But if he's alive, Hiroko said, taking the lead once more. I can't wait to see him fight Itachi-san's brother. Hey! That's right. That fight should be awesome, Makoto said, brightening as well. I'll put 20 rai on him. Naruto or Sasuke? Makoto mused as they finally cleared the trees and landed in the same clearing that they had arrived in about 6 hours ago. Naruto. Again, if he survived. Okay, I'll take the bet, Hiroko said, scanning the area carefully. I doubt Itachi-san will let his brother be that poorly trained. Ah, but Anko-senpai is going to really push him, Makoto responded, slipping his Kuzurigama from its pouch and nodding at the entrance that was almost hidden in the rock face. I'll go first, nay? Yeah, Hiroko agreed, slipping his sai from their holsters carefully, following his teammate into the entrance. He was put off slightly by the odd feeling he was getting the further they went into this darkening tunnel. Hiroko quickly lost sense of time. The further they went, the more it felt like it was never going to end. Hey, this is strange, Makoto said, crouching down to check on something. What is it? Blood, Makoto said, his tone dubious. At least I think it is. Looks a bit green. Remember that girl claimed she stabbed one of them, Hiroko said, shaking his head, studying the liquid as well, happy that, for once, their masks actually worked like they were supposed to, allowing them to see in the dark. Here I thought she was just trying to impress us, Makoto muttered before continuing downward, both being very careful not to make a sound. Finally, after what felt like hours, they came to the semi-hidden entrance, and, with speed only granted to ANBU, they darted inside, expecting a fight. Sweet Kami, Makoto hissed, stopping suddenly. Hiroko agreed, looking around in awe. Instead of giant spiders waiting to pounce, or enemy ninja, what they found was total desolation. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in that same green liquid as in the stairway. There were large chunks of rock all over the place, and most frightening of all was the lingering sense of a killing intent. This is, Makoto whispered, looking around intently. That is a killer intent I'm feeling, right? What's left of it? Hiroko confirmed, moving slightly to the left, looking around curiously. It had to be unusually intense for us to still be able to feel it. What about that chakra? Unusual, Hiroko agreed again, motioning for them to split up. Moving as noiselessly as possible, they searched the cavern, careful to note the total lack of bodies. Just blood, killing intent, and lingering chakra. Meeting in the center, they looked around and then at each other. Is it me, or does this place feel almost like a tomb? Makoto said, his tone uneasy. It does, Hiroko confirmed, nodding toward a large smear of greenish blood leading from a man-sized hole in the wall. Did you notice that? Turning, Makoto glanced at what his partner had noted, then nodded slightly. Yeah. Scary that a genin could do this. I know. Hiroko glanced at his teammate, then around at the cavern. Did you find his body anywhere? No, Makoto muttered, crossing his arms. I'm not sure if that's a good sign or a bad sign. Okay, one step at a time, Hiroko said, twirling one of his sai expertly. We've confirmed that Team Hate completed the mission and that Uzumaki Naruto slaughtered an entire group of giant spiders and at least one assumed Jonin-ranked ninja. We have no idea where his body is. Makoto sighed. Right, so it's search time. You take the left, I'll take the right. Check. Hiroko agreed, and both A and BU separated, taking their respective sides of the cavern, and began searching. Unlike they had at first, they actually paid attention to the cavern, looking for a body. The initial surprise at such a large amount of destruction had overridden common sense. After all, It was not every day you got to see handiwork of this caliber from a genin. Enko really was a better teacher than he had thought. Shit, now this meant that if he wanted any chance at Sasuke winning, he'd have to train him alongside Itachi. Geez, just how strong was Naruto? Shaking his head, he squatted, lifting a large rock and almost hoping to see an broken body, but found nothing. Standing, he looked around, wondering where the boy could have been. Hey, I found him! Makoto shouted, and Hiroko turned, darting toward the other man. The ANBU in question was kneeling over the battered and bruised form of a blonde-haired child with strange whisker marks. His clothes looked horrible, and his face was pale, but it was obvious that he was alive. Unconscious, but alive. Is it chakra exhaustion? Makoto ran a glowing blue hand over the boy for a moment, then shook his head. Well, he is low on chakra, but it's not deadly. That's funny. What is? Makoto looked up, and Hiroko could imagine the confused look on the man's face despite the mask. Well, his body's already healing itself. It's moving slowly, but it's just strange. Probably a bloodline, Hiroko said, shrugging dismissively. Let's get him out of here. Yeah. He's okay to move, and I'll keep an eye on him just in case, Makoto said, putting his weapon up before collecting the boy and standing. Don't suppose I could make it 100 Ryan now, huh? Not on your life, Hiroko responded dryly, turning to lead the way out of the cavern. Spoil sport? Idioto. The man watched the samurai intently from his hiding spot, knowing that soon he would have to act, but hesitant to actually do so. He had spent a week studying the patrols, he knew the layout of the estate to the last detail. Still he hesitated, the sheer numbers only ensured that this was a suicide mission, but he had no choice. It was his mission. As the current patrol disappeared around the far corner, he made his move, darting toward the outer wall and jumping it silently. Landing adroitly, he took a moment to look around at the garden, savoring its tranquil beauty, and then he darted forward once more. Not a single blade of grass was disturbed in his passage, and soon enough he was at the limestone inner walls. Kneeling, he quickly slipped his foot spikes into place, and then satisfied did the same with his hand claws. He could not risk the use of excess chakra needed to climb. Nodding, the man jumped, his spikes finding a tenuous purchase, and then he was climbing. Seconds later he cleared this final wall and landed on the inner courtyard, hidden among the swirling shadows. Holding his breath, he crouched, watching as a group of 3 samurai strode past in conversation. Once the path was clear, he darted along and then slipped through the first window he found. Pausing long enough to remove the climbing tools, he stood, taking in the corridor. Eyes adjusting to the dim candlelight, he hurried down the hallway, careful to use the stealthy step, ducking into an alcove as yet another group of samurai passed on a patrol. Frowning, he watched them intently, uneasy now due to the unexpectedness of it. There was supposed to be no guards making a patrol in this part of the mansion for several hours. Tensing, he waited until he was sure they were gone and that nobody else was going to follow, then moved out into the hallway and hurried forward. He made the rest of the trip in peace, stopping at the last corner, aware that he was now facing the most dangerous part of his mission. Slipping a mirror out of a pouch, he peeked around the corner carefully to ensure that the samurai was exactly where he should have been. Satisfied, he returned the mirror to its proper location and prepared himself. Straining, he heard the samurai yawn, and second later he had embedded a kunai into the samurai's skull while darting forward to catch the body and let the dead samurai slump gently. Easing the samurai to the ground, the man paused, retrieved his kunai, and then eased the door open to cross the empty space beyond. Moving quietly, he hurried forward, ignoring various doorways until at last he paused at one that seemed utterly innocent. No different than any other door in the mansion, but he knew that it was his final obstacle on his mission. The kunai slid into his right hand silently as he knocked in the coded pattern known to a select few. He paused, listening to the answering knock, and then responded yet again, speaking quietly. I have urgent dispatches for Kasiji-sama. The door swung open and the man lunged forward, his kunai slashing through the first samurai's throat and then burying itself into the second of the guards. A slight twist and out again. He was moving before they hit the ground, pushing through the door into an inner. Everything was going perfectly. Spotting the desired shoji, he applied chakra to his feet and shot across the anteroom, tearing through the door and lunging for the sleeping figure inside. Kunai gleaming, he plunged it toward the figure's chest, only to have it deflected by a gleaming katana. Retreating, the man paused, studying the samurai that was standing between him and his target. The man was average height and build, the typical red and black uniform of fire samurai. It was seeing those blue eyes and the white hair that alerted him to the identity of his newfound foe. Shinta, formerly of the Konoha Hunter-Neens. Shinta shifted his sword slightly, his voice firm. Though you wear that mask, I know you. Katsumoto of the Konoha Anbu. Katsumoto lunged at that, ducking the first slash at his neck, knowing that he was in over his head. Blow after blow was exchanged with the former Hunter-Neen, each time making it clear that Shinta was not going to allow this attack. Still, Katsumoto could not abandon this mission. It had to be seen through to the end. Then seconds after a brutal exchange left him unarmed, the Anbu knew his final option was at hand. The samurai charged in once more, and Katsumoto timed it perfectly, slipping inside to grab the man's robes and arm while falling backwards. It wouldn't stop the man, but it was enough for the man to have time for his final effort. For unity! That shouted Katsumoto began flashing through a series of hand seals for his special attack, staring at the recovering Shinta almost placidly. The Anbu saw the sword suddenly slashing through the air, and he had just enough time to realize he was still too slow. After that his head was sailing through the air, and his jutsu died unfinished.